right, we are live. Yo, all right. Sorry for the delay, everybody. The council has assembled. Me and Ramon here. We're here for our Discord challenge. Got Mr. Oh, I have to point the other way. Ramon Hurtado over here on the side. We're gonna do some critiques today and just talk about drawing and answer your guys' questions and have some fun drawing some grippers and stuff. So Ramon is, I keep pointing the wrong way. Ramon is, a guy who taught me, drawing feet. The reason why I did this challenge was one, because it's just funny. And two, because, I feel like hands and feet are the things that everyone avoids. And of the two of those, probably people do, study feet even less. So I just wanted to kind of focus on something new, and it's new for me too. So I got to pull in Ramon over here. Ramon, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Just a quick note also, feet are probably the body part that you can monetize the most online, so it's good to know how to draw them. If you know, you know. My name's Ramon. I'm a painter, teacher, cat dad first and foremost. Been doing this for a little bit. Just a lot of focusing on anatomy and that sort of thing. It was fascinating when I started, and it's fascinating still. So anyway, yeah, just excited to be here.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, so we'll kind of keep, expanding on this stuff. I think Ramon's going to do a lot of the drawovers here, and we'll kind of just go through these submissions. We have actually a manageable amount of submissions on a challenge. You guys were scared of feet. This is last challenge. We had, I think, 76 submissions. This we got like 20 something. So a quarter of you guys are not freaky enough or just too scared of what's inside of you.
Can't hang.
Yeah. So I do want to say before we start though, Ramon just dropped a really exciting course. We've been working together in the background here to actually kind of develop our own beginners course. That's coming out, sometime next year. We'll slowly trickle out some information, but in the meantime, Ramon has done some really amazing stuff. If you don't know his work, let me pull it up right over here. Ramon just finished his painting. He did a 19th century painting in the Prito-Rome style. That's this, this 19th century. Ramon likes to call it the American Idol of painting. Ramon, how many feet? Oh, you only had to paint 1 foot over here.
Yeah, it's a little short on feet actually. There is the teaser. The mummy has feet, but they're covered up. So.
Yeah, I know.
But
yeah,
I just got to keep the people wanting more. I'll be releasing the. Oh wait, never mind. There they are.
Yeah. But this kind of compounds into a huge workshop that Ramon did about composition and painting and all that stuff. Do you want to give a little a elevator pitch of the workshop, Ramon, that you put together for all this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the main reason for doing this is, nobody really gets into art just to do anatomy studies, right? Unless they're a feat, of course. But generally, sorry. Sorry about that. I'm a little short on water. But generally speaking, people get into this because they have stories they want to tell. They have something personal, they have certain artwork that they want to make. And so they get the training in order to express those ideas. But sometimes you do the training and you kind of get lost in the sauce, you forget what you were doing it for. For me, it was always I always wanted to make a big narrative painting. And so, I've done a lot of research on how people did it, because when I was in school, I had a really great education, but it was hard to know how to put it all together. And there wasn't a lot of instruction in terms of what you learn about painting and what you learn about drawing and composition and anatomy, how it all works together and how it all works together in the service of a story. So last year, I decided to go all in and start this, behemoth back here. And, I locked myself up. I made a mannequin and, built a mummy and a suit of armor that you can see there.
Oh, yeah.
Made out of basically just glue and an old t-shirt and a bunch of junk. But but the point of it all, and in putting it together in a workshop, because I documented the whole process, is just to show people, like, if someone wants to, make something like this, that it is accessible, and it's probably in some ways like easier and more fun than you might think. The whole process for me felt like, the same way it used to feel when I was a kid and I would play with Lego blocks, except that these are like, bigger Lego blocks. But the I released the first part of the workshop last year while I was starting to work on the painting. And now that the painting's done, I'm doing like a live bonus session, so that people can see like how it all turned out and kind of like a recap of the whole process. But yeah, I'm super excited about it. The first part of it, for anyone who signs up, like, you can watch the recordings of like the previous, parts immediately. It's like 30 hours of video. There is some Cooper content. That's one of my cats, Cooper, on screen.
Perfect
But
timing. I got it on screen right now.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, it just walks you through like how to make like little sketches, how to make like clay maquettes, how to make a mannequin so that you can like have it pose with drapery and stuff, how to work with live models, like how much to do, how much to put in, like how much to obsess over anatomy. The answer is less than you think.
Yeah.
All the tools that you learn in your education, you only use like a little bit of them in making like a real painting. You never have to like vomit out everything like an encyclopedia. But yeah, so yeah, anyone that signs up gets access to like those 30 hours of video, and on December 1st there will be another live session that will also get recorded.
Yeah.
But the live sessions are fun. It's like this. You get to like ask questions and just like kind of hang out, and I'll walk you through how to make your own terrifying mannequin and big painting and all that. So
Mhm.
yeah, if you guys are
Sweet.
interested, yeah, please check it out.
Yeah, I'm super excited for that, and I think like that type of mindset kind of builds into like all the studying stuff that we'll get into today. Um, so let's see, I think you know part of like I think what made this study like or this practice here like intimidating to jump right into. We can kind of like scroll through some of these submissions. Is it was a little bit more open ended. It wasn't like I'm just posting like a portrait picture and then
Yeah.
everyone's got to like make the best copy of the portrait picture possible. Like it was more like, hey, like let's just study a specific body part and like try to learn about it, like however you decide to learn about it in whatever way that like means something to you. Kind of why I want to do this and why I want to focus on something more open ended. Is actually like encourage people like a mindset of like how to just approach stuff and have fun and learn about new things. I'm curious to like hear like your thoughts on like studying, Ramon, and how you approach like, do you just do a bunch of like boxes and cubes and hardcore like skeletal drawings and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's changed a lot like since I started. Like, because I think that you go through grade school and you get this like illusion that there are like correct answers to everything, right? And that
Mhm.
there's like an unchanging right answer to things. And you still have that like mentality of like wanting to do a good job. And just getting like a pat on the head from your teacher, like that's how you learn to get like that's how you learn that you're doing a good job. I think including Shrek is always a good idea. Like in that the one of the submissions on. But I think like anything that you look at, like there's so much information you could get from it. Like you could focus on like the color of like the feet, or like you could focus on like the small forms or the big forms, or you could focus on like what they look like when they're fully fleshed out. You could focus on studying like an individual person's feet, or on studying like the kind of like average kind of kind of like universal foot, like mostly what everybody has in common. You can make really simple, exaggerated feet, or you can have like, super like realistic feet that go into like a really tiny level of detail. You can focus on the big form of them. You can focus on the movement. So really, I think the key to studying is knowing why you're studying. Like,
Mhm.
why do you want this? For me, making that big painting helped me to gain a lot more clarity about art education, because you don't just like study all the bones or whatever just to know all the bones. Like, and day to day as a working artist, you don't use most of that knowledge. You use like most of the really basic stuff. And so it's like the fancy stuff, like the really complicated things that are intimidating, you kind of bust those out like once in a blue moon. So in a lot of ways, like it's kind of a better idea to be like to some degree, a jack of most trades rather than just like hyper focusing on like knowing everything there is to know about perspective or about like, form or about like, et cetera, et cetera. Like each of these things is like a rabbit hole that is like infinite. Like it just doesn't stop. So you're the one that kind of has to like bring it back to like, okay,
Yeah.
this is what I want. I need this much anatomy to do the things that I want to do. Because the
You
anatomy
wanna
stuff doesn't stop.
do you wanna grab one of these like that you think would like be a nice like starter point for our most basic concepts of like how do we approach studying, like what types of things should we focus on from like that more like fundamental level? You can pull that up and start chatting about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Here, let me grab one.
Yeah, I think that's like the most important thing is like, if you're giving somebody like or I see this a lot. People will ask for critique on anything and they'll okay, here's my cast drawing, can I have critique on it? And it's like, well, what is your like, why did you do this, right? And especially something I see with like something that I struggle with people online is I'll see someone post a cast drawing and it's got like almost perfect accuracy and perfect values, and then there's some things that aren't making sense. Like there's not really a deep understanding underneath it, and what's happening is, oh, Ramon audio gone. Oh, I'm sorry guys, I didn't add Ramon's audio to this channel. My bad. Okay, he didn't miss. It was me
Yeah,
yapping. Oh, there we go. I what like I see people will kind of like draw the best they can and then just kind of trace over or like pick the colors off of something or something like that. And I think you have to ask yourself when you're working that way, or just in any study, really, this is just a specific example, like what is your purpose here? Is the goal of doing this, to get perfect accuracy? Is the goal of doing this to learn about like the big forms? Is the goal of doing this to learn about the gesture, or the proportions, or to draw, Shrek or something like that, right? Like it can be anything, and it doesn't have to be like, if you're studying, probably making an aesthetically pleasing or a super accurate image is really low on the list of things to care about.
Yeah, that's a really good point. First about Shrek, but second about like not getting too caught up in like the aesthetics of the drawing. Because like I think part of what's important to understand is that like there is just like an emotional part of this. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you care enough to like spend hours doing this stuff, then like you're you're like emotionally invested, right? Like there's like something that like that's the thing that like drives you. Like drawing makes you like feel good, or it makes you feel fulfilled or accomplished or whatever, right? And so I think you have to kind of parse out like first of all, I think art and like drawing and painting are not like optimal ways to get happiness. So that's number one. Like they're not the best thing to depend on for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least not like the outcomes. But because I see people get like really down on themselves when they maybe have like an hour to do a study. They're copying, let's say they're copying like a foot, right?
Yeah.
And like it doesn't look exactly like the original, or like it doesn't have this or that. It doesn't like it's not the foot drawing to end all foot drawings, and
Mm-hmm.
people will get like upset and really down on themselves, and it's like, dude, that is an insane thing to expect from like one little
Yeah.
1 hour drawing. It's like you could be Michelangelo, and like obviously Michelangelo can make the David, right? But like kind of, right? Michelangelo could make the David given enough time and
Yeah.
resources. But like Michelangelo couldn't whip out the David in 2 minutes. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? He couldn't do it in 10 minutes. He couldn't do
100%.
it in 2 months. He couldn't do it in 10 months, right? There's like sometimes it's less about you and more about the task. Like if a task is difficult enough, you kind of have to like respect the difficulty of it and not like have unreasonable expectations. Like, I see this all the time where people will, copy like a, let's say like a Sargent painting, right? And, or whatever, painter of your choice. And, they'll give themselves like 3 hours to do it, and they'll be upset that theirs doesn't look like the original, or it doesn't like match this or that part of it. And it's like, brother, that took him like 12 hours. Like if you think that this is someone you're trying to learn from, that you think knows more than you, and now you think that you can do what they did in less time, like which is it? It's like, if you can do what they could do in less time than them, they should be studying with you. Like,
right.
So I think, kind of letting go of that, like, I think it's exactly what you said. Like, if you're doing a study and you're doing it to learn, the goal is that you learn something at the end of it. That could be like, understanding how like different forms of like the foot fit together, or understanding how to organize values or whatever. If your drawing looks shitty, that's fine. Like, what matters is that you're not going to remember that drawing in like a week, but you are going to remember the things that you learn from it. So really, when you're doing studies, like regardless of what aspect you focus on, you're kind of like mining it for information. You're like, what can I pull from this? And it can just be, if you learn one thing, just like one thing from a study, that's crazy. That's a lot. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect in every way, but every time you do sit down and do a little study, you get like one little nugget of knowledge to take away from you. You do that over like a lengthy period of time, and it's like, dude, that's insane. That's like, very few things have that kind of yield, But yeah, I think it's important to like go into this kind of like, okay, if you want a fancy drawing, then like you make a fancy drawing. If you want to study where you learn stuff, then you just go in and you don't care what the drawing looks like. You just care that like you figure something out. And if the drawing looks nice, good. And if it doesn't, who cares, But I think you have to be sort of pretty ruthless as far as that goes. Because it's ultimately like being nicer to yourself as you're working.
100%.
Yeah.
And if you're just like, yeah, and I think that's the thing too. It's like, it's really easy to be super mean to yourself and get super caught up on all these different ideas that are like, jumping around in your mind. Like, I'm mostly self-taught, or, learned a lot on the internet. Like, most people in the Discord have learned through the internet. This isn't like a traditional like atelier or something like that. It's not a workshop or academy. We are plagued by having like 500 different people telling us the right way to do it at any given time. And it's really easy to get tangled up. You just have to think about like what you want out of it. And set your expectations. I think that's super important.
Yeah, the point is that it works for you. Like, it's like if you do something not up to like a certain standard or whatever, it's like, Rembrandt's ghost is not gonna like come and like, bonk you over the head at night. Like, you don't owe anything to these dead people. Like, it's like they're like a library of resources that you can learn from, but like, they don't care if you do things the way they did or not. They're dead. It's like, they're so smart. How come they're not alive anymore? But yeah, I mean, also just as like a little bit of trivia, before we actually get into like the drawings. There's a guy, I'm probably going to butcher his name. If you just read it like phonetically in English, it's Roger de Piles, but I think he was French. So I think it's Roger de Pi. But he basically came up with like a scorecard, and he rated different masters like Rubens and Rembrandt and whatever. He gave them like a grade on like composition, like storytelling, and like drawing and like color and stuff. And Rembrandt got like, he just got wasted in the drawing one, which like is funny because if you look at like a Rembrandt drawing, like clearly it's like well drawn, like in the sense that like that can mean a lot of things, right? But like one of my teachers, Will Weston, used to always say like, good drawing is drawing that serves its purpose. So like, it's like if you look at a Rembrandt foot, even if it's not like that detailed or that graceful or whatever, like it looks like a foot, so it's like that's probably, it is accomplishing that purpose. But people for a long time have been trying to like, get like these like unbreakable rules that they can like pin things down to, because I think it gives them comfort, but it's like, it's kind of like a false comfort,
Yeah.
You got to embrace the chaos a little bit. So I do have a drawing pulled up here. Should we dive in?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm balancing some audio stuff in the background, but please, I think let's let's approach this one with, just like kind of a broad scope about like how do we want to like think about, build these things from the base up. And I think I looked at a bunch of like Will Weston stuff too for this. Like, I think when you start studying any part of the figure, I really think one of the most impactful things you can do when you learn is to start with like basic proportions. Do you agree with that? Yeah. I feel like that's like the most bang for your buck that you can get in studying, because you're always going to use that like instantly.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, and the thing is that like, anything like that you study, or anything that's like, again, kind of like a universal system, like it pays to like study it and then take it with like like a grain of salt, right? Where it's like most people's feet have more or less the same proportions, at least lengthwise. And like, or at least like, I think it's useful to think of it this way. There's a range, right? Where it's like, let's say you have like a person standing here, like in, profile, and here are their feet, right? Like some people have smaller feet, some people have bigger feet or whatever, but no one has feet that are like this big. You know what I mean? Like Sideshow Bob, like just like enormous like feet,
Mm-hmm.
And, like on most people, like a standard foot is not going to be like, it's not going to stick out like this much, right? There's like a range where it's like, okay, let's say you have a foot here and it's like, well, maybe it's a little bigger, maybe it's a little smaller, but the variations from person to person are not as big as people think, right? Like, sure, everybody's different, but like in a very relatively small margin. The only reason that margin looks big to us as humans is because we care a lot about the differences like between, like each of us. But it's, yeah, like if a dog looks at you, like probably all people look pretty much the same, or like with sort of fairly minor variations. So I think having like in your head just like a kind of baseline for like, okay, this is more or less like how big a foot is, and this is more or less how it splits up, I think is a good idea. Um, and I think you're right. Like the big stuff always pays off the most. So like big proportions, big forms, the big movement. Like you can always subdivide stuff after that, but I do think that like splicing things up into too many pieces too soon gives you too much to deal with, and it's like it's overwhelming. So like what I try to think about, like 99% of the time, and sometimes I don't even have to do much more than this, is like I try to think of a foot like inside of a sock. Like just that overall, not splitting it up, and at least not at first. And like you're just trying to think of like, okay, like, this has like a front and it has a side, this has a front and it has a side. And that already is telling you like three-dimensional like information about this, right? And like honestly, there are times when that is a good enough foot and you don't have to do anything else to it. You can just like quit right there and that's a wrap. And obviously other times you'll need to add more stuff, but I think it's useful to add that stuff like as needed, right? So let's say we have this like foot inside of a sock. The basic proportions that I tend to work with is I try to, roughly think of it, and I'm not doing this like mathematically when I'm drawing, right? Like, but just in my head, I'm like, well, let's think of it in like three parts, right? There's like the part of the foot that really is just like, the part that connects to the leg. There's the body of the foot, and then there's, toe town over here, right? So I just think of it as like I have one, two,
I like toe town.
And then like, yeah, right. Yeah, very dense population center. And then like, beyond that, I mean, well, this, but like I like analogies. I think they're fun. I think anything that makes this process more enjoyable, like, is a good thing. Like actually, yeah, I mean, this is probably a radical, hot take, but like you don't have to feel horrible to learn stuff. Like you don't have to like be, it doesn't have to be painful necessarily. So let's say that you have your, you have, leg city, the body of the foot, and toe town over here. You can come into toe town and imagine that this person is wearing socks with sandals. So you put the sandal strap in, and that separates out the big toe, which is basically like it's like a potato wedge, right? And then you have the rest of the toes, the smaller ones. Maybe you draw them all together first, and then you can separate them out if you want. And each of those is like a little thing of like macaroni pasta, right? But you only split these things up when you like absolutely have to, right?
Mhm.
And so I think like that's probably one of the more practical things, because like if you're just out and about like doing, you know, some life drawing from a model or sketching out an idea or something, it's like this stuff here is useful to learn, but you're not going to dive into this that quick. Like you might never have to like, you know, do like this and then separate out into that and separate out into like all these different parts. So I think it's like whatever the laziest part of you is, like as a person, like let that lead, you know, let that like start with that. And then you almost have to have the attitude in your head like, "Oh, okay, fine, I'll add the toes," or okay, fine, I'll separate out the toenails, or, you know, whatever else. But you have to be, I think, like pretty stingy with like your effort, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
This drawing.
I think like it's just about, there's no sense in like establishing any details until first you establish kind of the whole, you know? So it's about just that big sock silhouette is the easiest thing possible. And it's also like the most important thing, because if you're drawing a figure from life or from photo reference or whatever, like you're just gonna draw in like the basic silhouette or your gesture drawing first, right? And that's what it's gonna be. Yeah. So why not approach everything, you know, like if you're gonna do a foot study, why wouldn't you approach it just the same way? You know, we want to make sure that we like we have like a consistent way of drawing. We're not like, okay, this is the way that I approach studies, and this is the way that I approach composition, this is the way that I approach, you know, it should all be kind of centered.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Because the thing is that, like, you know, in the same way that you can think of the different parts of a drawing separately, you can think of your education very separately. Like maybe you learn perspective from one person, and you learn like, you know, anatomy from another person, and like drawing from yet another person, and perspective or painting from like a completely different person. And it just makes you feel like you have so many things to learn, like so many like just, you know, completely different disciplines that you don't know how to combine. But you're right. If you start out from these like really basic principles where, again, even something as like abstract and like, you know, almost self-explanatory as like start from the easiest thing. Whatever you look at in your study and you're like, I can do that thing, right? Mm-hmm. Don't start from like the hardest thing. Because the more difficult things might be hard to see because they're subtle or whatever. But as you get rid of all the obvious things, you know, there's nothing left to do but the, you know, difficult things. But then once you have filled in pretty much everything else, it might actually be pretty obvious like what the difference was, you know, or it might not be important to notice. But you're right. I think you always have to bring it back to like, why are you doing this? You know, it's like, it's not really worth it to like, let's say you want to, you know, do visual development for animation, or like you want to do like character design or something. Like, you know, obviously you have to learn how to draw like hands and feet and stuff, but like, will it, you know, but it's a matter of like degrees, right? Where it's like, will it be that useful to you to like study the differences between every single, you know, like toe bone, like they do at like some of the Russian academies? Like, you know, is getting into the weeds of it to this degree going to make you design better characters? Probably not, right? Like you probably could have stopped like way back here, or maybe a little bit more than this, but certainly not all the way to like, you know, this. Like if you feel that you have to learn everything about one discipline before you move on to study the next thing, you'll never be done. Like, you know, it's just, there's too much, and you don't need to know everything to get started. But this drawing in particular, I forget, let's see who did this.
Splash.
Yeah, this is great. Like, and you know, I think particularly this, that's like, you know, you're drawing like an actual foot. Like stuff like this is a diagram, which is really useful, but you almost don't want to like lead with this, right? Like when you're drawing an actual foot, or like you're drawing like a character or whatever, I would continue doing like just what you're doing here, right? Which is like, this is like a map. This gives you like things to look for, you know, like, oh, there might be like a break from like this top plane, you know, to like this ramp here, right? Or maybe like right around here is where this turns to the side, or there's like the heel sticking out back here, or there's like a little flat space here. right there before the toes. Okay, that's great. What you want to do is like, you want to take that as almost like a grocery list or like a list of directions and look for that, like in the real person. Like,
Mhm.
how does this show up on, like a real actual foot? Um, things that I would say here when you're studying like this, instead of like, um, you want to have like certain takeaways from what you're doing. Like if you're studying, just kind of like, again, a basic foot for the structure and all that, try to really like, instead of, just like, don't think of them as just shadows or just shapes. I mean, that stuff's useful to have, right? But like, don't stop your thinking there, right?
Mhm.
If you see that this goes dark here and this doesn't, that's probably because there's a plane break, right? It's like, oh, this might be the top of the form and this is like the side,
Mhm.
right? Like you want to think of like how these things assemble. Like, why would this little, shadow stop right here, right? Well, what's happening is like this wants to come in straight, this little thing from the tendons, and then there's another egg form, or fairly egg-like form that cuts it off, right? So now this has to fit around that other egg form. And you get clues to that egg form here, right? You get obviously like the roundness of this, you get the, this right here.
Mhm.
It's not like 100% an egg, but it's like sort of a convenient little thing for now. And you can see this curves over, and then you might be like, oh, actually this probably comes down like all the way through here. You sort of like, you connect the dots. It's like when you see like a real, like a drawing or like a real foot or whatever, you're getting like little clues, right? You're like an archaeologist on a dig, and you find like, some dinosaur fossils here, and then you find another bone here, and then you find like a rib here, and then you find a tail over here. I mean, you could just take this at face value and be like, well, I found a head, some legs, and a tail. But probably if you dig up this sand, there's going to be the rest of it in between, right? If you connect the dots. So you dig to find that. And it's the same thing here. It's like you get little clues to certain forms. Like why would this outline look like that? Why would that like bump like that? Oh, because those are two separate forms. There's like a little cushion here, and then that must stop. Otherwise, the form wouldn't, like the outside wouldn't do that, right?
Mhm.
So it's like, oh, there's like a little cushion thing here, right? And then, okay, this seems to go, pretty straight right there. I think the way you're handling the toes here is really good. It just feels like they don't feel too separate. This is nice as this wraps around, you know. Whatever you're drawing with, you could keep it sharper. That would, just not give you
Yeah.
these like really heavy outlines that
I wonder if
kinda,
it's
like, hard
vine
to see.
charcoal. That's kind of what it
It
feels
might
like.
be, yeah. Yeah. I would just like get some sandpaper and just like sharpen up
Yeah.
a couple of sticks, and as you're working, one of them gets dulled and just like swap it out. But
The
you're
the
making your life harder.
the tools don't matter, but they do matter. Like they don't really matter
Yeah,
ultimately, but having some, like, when I'm studying, when I'm sketching casually, whatever is
Yeah.
what's most important is something that's easy to pick up and sharpen, so I don't have to have a big barrier of entry, and then something that's like reasonably precise. So I think like sketching casually and studying best, probably like graphite is great, like a 4B, 2B, 6B graphite pencil, or a colored pencil. With the charcoal and the colored pencil, it's not as erasable. That's kind of the strength of like a 4B graphite. And then if I'm gonna do more rendering, well, now all of a sudden graphite's not as much of the best tool possible. So it's like kind of where you want to go with that stuff. You can do it in, you can do it and carve it out of a pumpkin, like one of my videos, but you should really help yourself out when you're studying. Like it does, nothing matters, but it does matter a little bit.
Yeah, it basically matters insofar as like the tools that you use don't matter that much until they get in your way. Like you want to work with something that isn't fighting you. Like because doing, like studying, like, drawing or whatever, like is hard enough. So you need like tools that are working with you. So you're right. It's like if you're doing sketches and they're not like super finished and they're not like, full value or whatever, you can sketch with pretty much anything. Like maybe the requirement is that it's like, yeah, it can be like precise enough that it's not like too clumsy and you're not like having to fight that, and that it's like erasable enough that you can like, you're not afraid to like make a mistake, quote unquote.
Mhm.
But and different tools work at different sizes. Like graphite's better for small stuff, charcoal works better for things that are like larger. but yeah, it's not like set in stone exactly.
Yeah, these are great.
Yeah, this is awesome.
I wonder who we should line up next person here.
Should we hop to another one or?
Yeah, I'm scrolling through right now. That's pretty good. I think Lena, I can always forward these to you too.
Oh, sure.
You see that one? I think that's a good jump.
Oh wait, did you send it to me on Discord?
Yeah, let me forward it to you on Discord. Yeah, Mr. Ramon. There you go. Yeah, that might be the best way. I can just feed these to you through the DMs.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, those. I think these are gonna fit well into this next category too. We're starting to see, I think, these that I'm sending have slightly stronger kind of, optical accuracy. Like, the proportions are pretty good. Maybe we can get a little bit more in depth with some kind of hatching and form ideas, like just more exploring these big shapes.
Yeah. Sorry, my Photoshop is like freezing out right here.
Oh yeah, that's classic Photoshop.
Yeah. Just being a piece of trash constantly. Oh yeah, these are great. Yeah, this is really, really nice. Like, it's funny because like part of the irony, I think, is that like if you're drawing like a nude figure or whatever, or just like a bare body part, it's like it kind of helps to think of it as like, again, more clothed at first and like progressively less so. So again, like you start with a sock and then you progressively get to like, just like a full bare foot. But what I really like here is like there's a rhythm that's established at first, right? Like this the big sweep, right? Like you could conceptualize this foot as just like, you had like this movement and it's like it's pretty uninterrupted. Like of course there's going to be like little humps and bumps along the way, but that's like kind of none of your business at first. Like you just look at that and you're like, nope, not for me, not yet. But just getting like this in there, it's great because like even though like Lena here like added a lot more information and detail to this, it still keeps that feeling that it's like not a bunch of like separate body parts, but like one foot, like everything from like the leg to these like tendons to the bones to the little toes, they all like work together, they all like lead into each other. That's great because that's really hard to do, especially if you start like drawing everything really separate, just like kind of focusing on like, oh, I got to get this little bit and this little bit over here and this little bit here, then you have too many things to keep track of and you're going to forget about that like big long movement.
Someone asked in the chat, I'm like, are these rhythms related to Riley rhythms? I think this is an interesting question because the Riley rhythms are kind of like it's like around that like Loomis time where people were really starting to like write these kind of more structured drawing books. And the Riley rhythms, there's nothing wrong with the Riley rhythm stuff. I like to not talk about it, not because there's anything wrong with the Riley rhythms. There's rhythmical movements through all of the anatomy in the body and how everything like kind of wedges. One piece of the body will wedge into another piece and another piece will come out of it. One thing you see on the body is like asymmetry. So one side of the ankle is a little bit higher. You go across the body, it's a little bit lower, and then one bone over here will be a little bit higher or lower, and you get this kind of back and forth movement across the body. These rhythms are everywhere. With the Riley rhythm stuff, the thing I don't like so much about it is when you start like actively trying to map on, it's like these diagrammatic drawings. It's like if you try to like actively map on and find all these Riley, they're not always there. You don't always see them, and it ends up like making things look a little bit systematized. And also like you can just find rhythm in anything. What do you think about that, Ramon?
No, 100%. Like, because the thing is that, like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with those rhythms per se, but like, that is like one person choosing the rhythms they thought were important.
Yeah.
But like, the amount of rhythms you can find is like basically infinite because like your body is all wrapped up together, right? So like, the thing about rhythm is literally all it means is that things connect. So it's like, you can go for the connections that like one person came up with, but don't think like, don't trick yourself into thinking that those are like the like most important whatever. Like, you might prioritize one rhythm over another one depending on like what the like what angle you have, right? Like all the rhythm finding stuff is just like the rhythms aren't real, they're just like your brain looking at stuff and being like imagining a through line because that's what our brains do. They just look for patterns, right? So in the same way that like, people looked at the stars and were like, that looks like a bear or whatever, it's like, it's basically just your brain telling you a story about like, they saw little bits of like a foot and they're like, hey, if I connect it, look at how they connect. That's the larger story behind that. But there's all kinds of stories you can tell about that. If you have a foot, you can follow, let's say the main story, you could say of like, okay, like the leg leading into the body of the foot, leading into the toes, and then out. Okay, cool. But there's also this other story of like a branching out of like this coming in here and then flowing out through the heel, right? And down here, there's all kinds of like other little sub rhythms that like pull off of that. So I would say like, yeah, like just like Jake was saying, like the important thing is that you connect things, that you don't think of things as being like just isolated like little elements that have no relationship. But as long as you're connecting them, it doesn't matter that much like which connections you make. If anything, maybe the only thing just to keep it manageable for yourself is like look for the biggest connections you can find. So like if you find that like, hey, like there's a path going this way, try to follow it as far as it'll take you until you like run out, of stuff. Because you already found that one, so you might as well like see it through all the way. But that's really it. Like a lot of people have a lot of words for this. Like Fish Tech just said in the chat, this is reminding me of people talking about gesture. Yeah, again, it's like it's just different names that people come up with for essentially the idea that again, the parts of your body are connected, right? Like there's links between things. That's all it is, right? Like if you're thinking about movement in the body, you're stacking blocks, right? You have maybe like a rib cage, maybe a head, maybe like, let's say you have a pelvis, you have a rib cage here and you have the head. Here's the head, right? So you have these blocks of stuff and that's how we tend to think of it, right? Like, sort of like they're these kind of like robotic separate things. But basically what we have to realize is that there's like little threads that join this stuff together. That's actually mostly what your muscles do, is like they join, they create continuity between these bones, right? But it's not just about muscles and bones or tendons or whatever. It's just that like, when you see words on a page, they have a theme and a story behind them. Otherwise, they would just be a bunch of words. But when they work together, they become something more. They become a story. It's the same thing for the body. It's like if you just have a bunch of bones, you just have a bunch of bones. You don't have a person yet, right? Like an actual person, like an actual living, breathing person is like, it's sort of more than the sum of the parts. Like there's like things that sort of like connect, all these separate little elements together, right? And so a lot of the times, it's like it's more useful to draw some indication. You can do it any number of ways. You can do this with a single line, you can do this with like, just like a thicker, sort of like a little noodle thing. But it might be more helpful to draw like, this continuous thing and then break it down into like, whatever else you need to break it down to afterwards.
Yeah, but I think that like one of the things it's difficult with this stuff if you're like trying to learn it because you need some sort of system, you need some sort of like guidance. But people will tell you to go learn gesture and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna draw these really charismatic, expressive stick figures with like all these lines going all over the place. Yeah, exactly. Glenville Poo.
Yeah, like everyone's
Glenville
like,
Poo on steroids. Yeah, and it's like, is this really all that helpful. You know, it depends on your goals, but I'm not sure what goals, you know, that helps. You know.
Well, it's just like you fall too far down the rabbit hole where it's like not every movement is an extreme movement. Like I remember in class one time someone like complaining that like the model's pose, like the model was like standing up and down. They're like, the model, there's no gesture there. And it's like, there is gesture there.
That drives me crazy.
It's your job to find that. Like, because you could literally have like just an arm. Yeah, isn't that frustrating when you hear like...
have you ever bought like a reference pack of photos online? I'm losing my mind. They're all like super dynamic fisheye lens. Someone's like coming at the camera like this. They're then just like insane pose. And you're like, I'm just trying to draw. Like, I'm not trying to do some like perspective calculation foreshortening on every limb and body. Yeah, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like people are really afraid to be like boring. So it's like, and I think we live in sort of like an advertising culture where it's like, even if you look at your fucking phone like ups the contrast of your pictures without even asking you. So it's like, you know, it just like makes everything just like, because so many things are screaming out for your attention that, you know, it's like, it becomes hard to appreciate like more kind of like quiet and sort of like subtle things.
Yeah.
Like if you have someone just with their arm down like this, right? Like, and something like, oh, that's boring. It has no gesture. No, incorrect. Like, I don't think there's that many things that are right or wrong, but I think this one's wrong.
Hit him with the meat spiral. Hit him with the meat spin.
It had to do it to him. Yeah, so like if you actually like put in the muscles or even an indication of the muscles here, you have the deltoid, which doesn't go straight. It like starts on one side and it like sort of starts to loop this way. It doesn't make it all the way through because the muscle runs out, but it wants to go this way. And then let's say you have the tricep here, and that's going to have a little echo here. Let's say you're flexing your tricep, right? It kind of looks like this, but it's not the same angle. It starts to like flare out. And then the tendon of the tricep, sorry, I think I said bicep. The tendon of the tricep kind of follows that, but it's like a little bit longer. Then like the elbow, you know, the actual like bone comes out. But the fun thing is that if you sight across, if you try to connect the dots over to some of the muscles of the forearm, in this case, the, you know, brachioradialis, you don't need to know the name of it to like, you know, just to start thinking about this. Because the point here is not the muscles. The point is that you're realizing that this stuff links up. Like this has a continuity to that. You know, this has a, you know, continuity to this, right? And this stuff right here will have a continuity to, let's say, the extensor muscles, which are like the little violin strings that go to your fingers that, you know, make you like able to, you know, wiggle your fingers around. So what happens is, instead of thinking of these muscles individually, you start to think of these like these rhythms. This is what I call the meat braid, because it's like a braid, but it's made out of meat, because that's what you're made out of mostly. And you know, like the other heads of the deltoid will like also follow this, right? And even at the smaller micro level, you know, like the smaller fibers will also follow like their own little spirals, right? So in any case, it's like if someone looks at this and they're like, oh, this pose is boring. It's like, no, the pose isn't boring. You're boring. Like your job is to kind of dig it out of the pose, at least when you're studying. Obviously, you know, if you're making your own artwork, like you do whatever you find is interesting. But there's no like, I don't think there's a pose or a person that's boring ever. It's just that like you might not be the person to dig that out maybe, or you might not care to. But anything and anyone, if you look at them long enough, is pretty fucking interesting. But just so we remember the meat braid.
Very important.
And that's not, yeah, that's not unique to arms, you know? It's like, you find that in legs, you find that in like torsos, you find that in everything.
Get some a foot meat braid. Need there's got to be like a dish for this, like some sort of something you get at like a town fair, and it's some sort of braided meat.
It's like a meat twist or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, a foot meat twist.
Yeah, there's a business idea. Yeah, yeah. Jake and I are gonna replace HelloFresh, and we're just gonna like mail out like meal kits that have like just various meats braided.
That's
like
that sounds good,
a kebab, but just braided.
It's very very Eastern European, cured meat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, just just good, practical, nutritious protein for the modern era, like for the for the modern person on the go.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna have to draw. We might at one point start drawing a foot during this
Okay.
during this foot critique.
Well, here we can like wrap up
Yeah.
with here. I mean, this is great. Like the one thing that I would look out for here, Lena, is like, um, you know, some of like the shading in here. Like some of these things feel like a little bit separate, right? Not everywhere. Like here, the shading that you have like supports, the feeling of like this little padded form on the side, because basically your feet are a bundle of bones, bundle of like pretty thin bones like this, almost like a little like like half a stick of like or half like a little bundle of like dynamite or something. And then you have the toes, after that, and here's the big toe, right? And here's like the body of the foot, back here. Which this should look familiar to most people. That's what high heels look like, or just like a lot of shoes. I mean, why do you think shoes look like that?
Yeah.
They look like that because they're supposed to go over feet.
It's like
So,
drawing underwear is a really great way to draw a simple pelvis.
Oh my
It's the
God,
same
it's
thing, yeah.
like because that's why underwear looks like that. Like
Yeah.
you can draw a torso by starting with like just like a full bodysuit, then going to like a one piece, then going to like a two-piece bathing suit, and then like progressively like make it more and more like quote unquote like anatomical. Basically just showing more and more evidence of like the bones and the muscle and like the actual like fat. But yeah, like here, like anything that you can do to like just kind of reinforce that this is like one complete form. So what that might look like is yeah, I didn't realize I was like drawing on the same layer here. Oops.
Yeah.
Well, here we'll just do it on top of this. But
Yeah, it's fine.
so let's say, okay, you had the shading here, right? Let's say when you come in and you shade like this up here, like the side of this form up here. Well, this form has to bump into this one, right? They have to like assemble together, right? So maybe this one's like going over like this, and this one's going over like that. You don't have to put in these like little cross contour things, but when you are doing the shading for this, it's gonna stop in such a way that it fits into this one, right? Because this one and this, like these two forms that are neighbors, they're pushing into each other, right? So when you're finishing up one form, the end of this form is already the beginning of the next one. So I think the movement that you have is really, really great. The character overall is good too. Like, things don't look like too round or too anything. What I think would be cool is like, when you are putting in shading, even if it's not full shading, doesn't really matter. Think of how these parts assemble. So like if this is a cylinder that's coming down and then there's this little thing that sticks out from it, maybe just shade the cylinder all the way and then carve out, how like this little thing like fits into it, right? Maybe keep that going all the way. Maybe here, like try to shade and like in the same way that you're finding these big rhythms, try to shade like in really big rhythms, and then when they run out, like cut them off. So just try to keep it going as long as you can. Let's say like here, like the side of this, like this would just like, keep going and going and going, maybe straight like that. But then when it bumps into this little padded piece, like that eats away at the cylinder, right? So then you get like just this nice little, crowding here where it's like there's one form here, and then boom, this one just like, like smashes into it. Because again, the body, all these things are like packed together pretty tight.
Yeah, one thing I'll add on to that a little bit here is just, in the same exact way, I really suggest, when you're working, after you get kind of that big idea and the big form in, and as you are thinking about like how those pieces slot into each other, and really this applies at any stage, try to, when you have a pencil and when you're making a mark across a surface, like you don't have to use the big brush. Every mark can just kind of walk on top of it like you're like a little ant walking on top of the form, and think about how things move up and down and kind of, tread around the surface. So as you're pulling this this ankle, right? You know, I see that you marked in a little, ball shape in here, which is great. You see that form. You can pull this way around it too, but also, make sure you pull out one way and then in the other way. That way you have a little bit of feeling of like, okay, this is coming outwards and then this is coming inwards, or on top of the foot here, you can pull along it like this, and, whatever way you put value on stuff is fine. But also, remember to move across to show, the top of the boxy form, and then you have this little kind of knuckle in here. This is a little bit more rounded and pulls inwards to that next part there. So just walk and move over on top of these forms, pretend you're a little ant, and just do. We come up and around the pad here, and then we come up here. And this is always how I'm moving around and sketching. And when I'm sketching and just trying to learn about something new, I focus more on like that direction and moving around the form than I do on, like the specific, patches of light and dark and stuff. And I think you're doing that here too, in a broader sense. And you could, you can combine that with Ramon's advice. Yeah, drop back to here.
Yeah, I think like, just like Jake was saying, it's like, when you're doing studies, you're like making little notes for yourself. It's like you're giving yourself a set of directions. So like anything that you need to do, to kind of like remind yourself later of like, oh, because again, it's like these individual drawings don't matter that much. What matters is what you learn from this. So if what you take away from this is that like you can, give yourself some markers for like how the form like, is like traveling in a certain area, or that like, these forms like assemble into each other, like you might remember that for every single foot that you draw from now on for the rest of your life. And these specific drawings you won't remember anymore. So it's like Jake's right. Like that's the valuable stuff. You're like extracting resources, from these feet.
Here, do you want to I'm gonna reply to this one. This is a Fish in the chat, Fish Tech.
Mm-hmm.
And he just asked, like, I've seen him asking, how do you feel form? Are you like always thinking about all this anatomy? This type of stuff. How do you balance all these like really complicated ideas when you don't even know what the forms are? Like how do you start that out?
Oh, okay. And this is not tied to a drawing. This is like a general question, right?
Yeah, I sent in their drawings that I just replied to in the DMs, but this is
okay.
A broader topic.
1 second. Is it these drawings?
No, it's scroll down. It's the most recent one.
This one right here?
Yeah, that one.
Okay, cool. So here, let's take a look. Yeah, I think you kind of have to do just like brass tacks, where it's like at a certain point, it's like, every foot that you draw or every form that you draw, like you have to think of like the, like Reddit, like those threads that are like, explain it to me like I'm 5. You have to do that to yourself all the time. Like you have to be like, okay. Sure, this is a foot. Sure, this is this. But like, what's like the most like simple, plain, like dumbed down version I can give myself of this, right? So for form, form is literally just space. So it doesn't matter if you've never seen a foot before or whatever, not that we would believe you, but, even if it's you're like an alien and it's like your first time doing that, like basically form just means that you're figuring out that something has, a top or a front, or a side, like that's it, right? Because that's 3D space, space is up and down, front to back, side to side. That's it. Now, you might learn more about the feet and know more about like small changes in the form. But at the end of the day, this is the stuff that matters. Like you can literally just like, again, make a little like foot like that, like a ramp, like a door stopper, and, put a side on it, right? So now it has a front and it has a side, or a top, I guess, and it has a side. And if you have the leg here, like you are digging for, where's the side and where's the front? Like you're just organizing or separating out or marking out where is like front, top, side, etc. Like that's literally it. And so what happens is when you start to think that way, you don't think of this as like, oh, it's just lines. You start to think of it as like, I'm moving from back to front. I'm moving from side to side. I'm moving from, bottom to top, right? And you start to feel like it's like you're traveling. It's again, it's like the same idea, that Jake was saying about like feeling like you're an ant crawling across the form. Here, you're like an ant rappelling down the form, just whoosh, falling down like this. Then you're sliding down the form here, and then you're just walking, right? But you have to think of it like you're like in 3D space. Like you have to pretend that your drawing is real, right? That you're like, okay, I'm sliding down, and then I'm going, okay, then or like I'm falling, then I'm sliding down, and now I'm just coasting, just like straight across like that. And you don't have to know anything about anatomy to do that. This is just how you navigate space. That's what you learn by crawling, like as a baby, basically, right? That you have some sense of like, well, if this looks like this, like if you just have a staircase, that this is flat, that they're horizontal, that this is vertical, that this is like horizontal and this is vertical.
Grid method for drawing
so in the same
portraits?
way, when you're drawing, you're like, oh, this is flat on the ground, this is vertical, this is vertical, oh, this is traveling down at an angle like a ramp, so this is like, whoop, this is sliding down, right? And then let's say you mark those things in, those tell you something about the form, and then you start to like, well, okay, do I see any evidence like of where it turns from like front to side? Like maybe there's a shadow here, or maybe there's just like a little bump or like a change in the color or something. And then that starts, and it can be subtle, but then that starts to tell you like, oh, this changes direction. Like, right, okay, this is the front and this is the side. This is the top and this is the side.
Yeah, every value change is just showing a change in form. If there's no way that a value can change, if there's no form, if there's nothing, you're just in the darkness, right? You're just in the void of space. If you see, light and then dark, well, now you have the corner of something. If you see light and then midtone and then dark, well, now you got a little bit of rounding. You carry that, all the way. So every time you see, a value change, you have to not just try to plop down the value in the right spot and hope that it looks like it. You want to think like, oh, what is that telling us about what's going on there? If I were to feel that, what would I feel?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like we're primed to do that. Like if you are walking down a sidewalk, here's you walking, and you see like just something painted black, or like one of those like street paintings that people do that it looks like a hole or something. Like your brain is trained to be like, the sidewalk is pretty gray, and if it's like the same color overall, it means that it's like that it's flat. But why is there that big contrast right there? Why does it look dark all of a sudden? Is that a hole? And your brain makes associations to think like, well, if there's a change in value that big, then maybe it's a hole. I don't want to fall in the hole, right? It's like your brain starts to think that like, oh, this isn't, something's changing here. Like there's something is amiss in this surface, right? And so, that happens like also just in day-to-day life, where like if you look at something like this, even though we haven't outlined these stairs, like your brain kind of is like, wait a minute, like this feels like this is doing that, like it's like coming down like this and then, whatever. And so that's the same thing that happens when you're drawing and painting. Like, if you have like a change in tone, like Jake was saying, it suggests that like there's a change in the surface, because no surface goes on forever, right? You don't just have like, infinite top of foot that just keeps going. Like at a certain point, the top of the foot ends and the side has to start. But what I would recommend for getting used to this is draw stuff from life, like whatever it is. It can be your own feet or it can be whatever. And if you see a change in tone, like actually touch it. Like put your hand on it. Or if you're drawing your feet, like put socks on, right? And when you see like a change in like the shadow or something, like actually plop your hand down here and be like, oh, this is flat. And then like, put your hand on here and be like, oh, this is going up and down. That's why that looks that way. Like that helps you to start imagining what Jake was saying, like you're physically there, like you're an actual like, ant crawling on the surface. Like
exactly.
Like literally just put your hand on it and, start to develop more of that like awareness. That's like what Jake said.
Sorry, you can go ahead.
No, I was just going to say like, it's what Jake said. You just have to like not take things at face value and just be like, okay, but why is it that? And like, that's it. That's the only like thing you have to add on to what you're doing.
Somebody they donated, In and Out donated and asked about what we think about the grid method. I think that this conversation topic actually kind of ties really perfectly into that. And this is what I said at the beginning of the stream too, is like, you know, when you're studying something, when you're trying to learn something, your goal really probably is going to be very far away from making an aesthetically pleasing or beautiful drawing. And like, the problem that I have with the grid method is that it's entirely focused on trying to like imitate the value that you see as close as possible, or to imitate the 2D accuracy as close to the reference photo as possible. It doesn't really help you understand anything about the foot. You know, when you're gridding something, you're purposely removing the topic, right? You're purposely removing the form of the foot. It could be anything behind that grid, because all you have to do is copy the patterns inside of each box. But when we're studying, we're not trying to do things like that. We're trying to think, you know, sculpturally. I see people in the chat talking about value, and it is value. And I think, you know, light and dark and value, it's important. But I like to think of this stuff a little bit more like sculpture. Like, you know, we're carving out big planes, big forms, and that's what matters. You know, and, you know, I don't recommend the grid method pretty much at all ever, just because I don't think it builds out those ideas about thinking about form and not caring so much about the aesthetics of it, but instead just trying to learn honestly and look at new things. Oh, you know, do you know, you know, it just popped up in chat, Mr. Leonid.
Oh, hey.
Friend. Leonid, do you want to come on the panel, brother?
Yeah, we gotta get him in here. Get the whole squad together.
Yeah, I know we should sometime. Actually, that'd be fun.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. Here, do we want to move on to the next? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah. What I was gonna say is, like, you know, think of it this way. Like, now that we have like photos and stuff, it can be very tempting to just like, you know, yeah, to copy things like spot for spot, but imagine this. Like, one thing that I try to think about a lot is like, you know, I think life would be easier if you try to develop the same relationship to drawing that you have to writing, right? Like, what's writing? Like, writing is like using like lines and dots and whatever to, like, you know, form letters and communicate ideas, right? Like any kind of ideas. They can be instructions, they can be poetry, they can be whatever, right? But we use like little lines and dots to do that. What is drawing? Drawing is using like, you know, lines and dots and whatever to communicate various ideas, right? It's just the lines and dots are different. But it's the same kind of thing where it's like, if you learn how to write, you're not just stuck like only being able to, like, you know, write love letters or only being able to write instruction manuals. Like, you learn the ideas so that you can write whatever the hell you want. And that's the same with this, right? Imagine that this is what the gridding method is like, you know, if I'm understanding it correctly. Like, imagine that someone gives you a page of text in a language that you don't understand. Let's say it's like, I don't know, whatever, like, you know, ancient Sumerian looks like or something, or just like some alphabet you don't recognize, right? We'll just make up one right now. Okay, let's say it's something like that, right? If you're trying to learn the language, like, you could maybe, you know, like, start on the same like piece of paper and put a grid on this, you know, and put the same grid over here, and like very carefully measure everything and copy each of these lines, you know, and you're only seeing them as lines. You're like, okay, I copy the line, and okay, this one has to go like this, and this
is
one has
kind
to go
of
like
the
that.
problem with like deciphering like hieroglyphics and stuff, because there's no, you know, like, you know, central like logic through it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like,
if you
make assertions.
Yeah, if you copy it spot for spot, then like you can get something that like maybe if someone already speaks that language, they would be able to read it. But you still have no idea what it says, because just like Jake said, you don't know the internal logic of it. Whereas let's say that someone took a class in this made-up language, right? Like for like 6 months, you know, they would know how to write sentences in it, and they could come up with new sentences. If you're copying like this, you could copy an entire book. You could do this for like 100 years, just copying the little symbols and whatever, and you would never know what it says, and you would never be able to like come up with your own sentences, and you would always have to be looking at something because you have no idea what's important and what's not. Whereas if you do have, you know, mastery of a certain language and you know what matters and what doesn't, let's say you can have something like table, right? And I can write that in my own handwriting and just, my own terrible handwriting, like table. And I know, like, even if I don't do it perfectly, I know that at least the letter T has to have, like, movement this way, movement that way for people to
That's
be able to read it. But I don't need an exact copy of this for you to realize that both of these say table. This one's pretty bad.
Put it.
But that's how it is with drawing too. It's like you're trying to learn the basic like tools of communication so that you're not always stuck like copying like existing things, but you can like have your own responses to stuff and summarize things or elaborate on them or do whatever, all the same things you do with writing that you take for granted, but like for drawing.
Here, let's speed through a couple.
Yeah, let's do that.
I just forwarded you a couple more.
Okay.
And if of course if you want to go through any, I'm just pulling these in what feels like a semi-logical progression.
Yeah, that sounds good. Here, so we'll pull up this one with the original two. It's a nice, good, hatchy, like 18th century drawing.
Yeah. Feels like a nice Herculean foot.
Yeah. Yeah, none of those weak feet here.
From Practicum, it could be from anywhere, but the Practicum site is that Russian site. But it's probably just some older 18th or 17th century.
I love looking at that stuff. It's like a lot of it's like really like whimsical, but the forms are always really
It's
clear.
very strange, yeah. Like and I said this to you the other day. They have these weird stylizations that they don't look like reality. Like I don't know where they came from, but like they all do it, and so it's very weird. Like you always see these super strong, and maybe the chatters aren't as deep into anatomy as this, but like have this super defined soleus muscle that like pulls out from under the calf, and it's like you never see that, but it's always there, and like everything has these really rounded forms. But it's very strange how these are approached, but they're beautifully done always, and they're very well connected, and that's another strength of like thinking about forms. If you just connect the stuff well, then you can kind of do whatever you want. You're not beholden to anything.
Well, I think back then, like part of it was just like sometimes like some random person decides what they think is like beautiful, and then I think back then it was like maybe easier to like kind of like enforce that. Like I think that was around the time that like men would wear heels, so like their calves were more developed, and it was supposed to be like one of like the hottest things on a dude is like just well-turned calves.
The French monarchy in a dress, wig, and heels, and they're the most masculine figure in the country.
Exactly, yeah. So I think it's just like expressions of that, like when you look at like Greek and Roman stuff, which is like a big influence on that. Like their whole thing is like making order out of chaos. So like we'll just very brief aside here, but like if you look at like let's say someone has a six-pack. Yeah.
With
2 seconds. Like, let's say someone has a six-pack, right? And it's like asymmetrical. Like that's genetic, right? Like some people have like six-packs that are kind of offset like this, and that's just how it is. But like the Greeks would look at that and be like, ew, that's too messy. Let's just make it a nice little like pack of 6, which you can actually have like up to 10, I think. It's just like there can be like hyper segmentation in the in like the muscle. But the Greeks are like, no, that's messy. Let's just like even it out. And that had an influence for like a really long time, See, that was a brief aside. It was probably briefest aside we've had.
Yeah.
So in here, like the movement that you have for this, like just the kind of like the through line here, I mean, that's great, and actually the way that like the general parts, like lead into each other, I think is really well done. I think the main thing here is you don't want to work too hard or get too confused by like, just kind of like, doing a lot of like really small things here with like all of this like all of this shading, because what'll happen is, you'll get like these kind of you just get like a lot of noise. You get like a lot of like bumps and bumps and bumps and bumps, and you're working too hard, right? Like if you look at how many changes there are in here, right? That almost makes it look as if the foot was kind of like it had like a really irregular surface, like a really bumpy surface. But over here, it's just kind of like, like a relatively flat pad, right? And so I think you want to be a little bit more systematic with the tools that you're using. And like Jake was saying, like maybe like, because it is already directional here, but you want to be maybe like a little bit more intentional about those directions. So what I would say is like, okay, look at this foot and look at like what is, squint your eyes and look at what's important about it. What's important about it is that you have this bottom of the foot and then you have effectively this side of the foot here, right? If we take away everything else from the foot and we just keep like, like front or top, side, right? Side, bottom. Like if we just keep that, you don't really lose that much of anything, right? So that's like the main sort of like, set of priorities for this foot that you'll want to keep in mind. So how does that look in practice? Basically, just doing like a little bit less. So like, let's say we take, this white that you're using, and instead of finding so many directions here at first, maybe just like, at first just like go across, like just like go like chop, 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 like that, right? So we just, because the bumps on that surface are pretty small, the main point of that heel is that it's like fairly flat and fairly padded, right? This is gonna go, okay, this is like relatively flat, because like your feet, yeah, there'll be creases on it, but mostly the pads on your feet are relatively flat because they go flat on the ground, right? At least mostly. And so, okay, maybe like come and flatten these areas out, like give yourself less to do rather than more. Come in and just map, like don't separate this out so much. If you need those separations, like you can add them with an eraser afterwards, but for now, just keep it like really organized and, don't give yourself too much to do. It's like,
and also to add on to that real quick, just because of some complicated light logic stuff that we can talk about another time, the where the changes happen most is at the edges of the form, at the edges of the shadows. Like that's where you can get the most bang for your buck, is working the edges between areas. Like, so if you're deep in the middle of some lights and you're carving out all these little changes, you're probably going to be overdoing it just because that stuff is naturally extremely subtle and small. So that's where you can focus.
Yeah, like within like you want to look for similarities first. So even though there are little changes inside the lights, most things in the lights are pretty similar to each other, right? And most things inside the shadows are pretty similar to each other. Like where you're going to see big jumps is not like from one part of the light to another part of the light. It's going to be a big jump from like the light to the back to like the background, or the light to the shadow or something. But, like all the stuff here is on the same team. So it's like, it's like I almost think of it as like they're wearing the same uniform, like they're not that different. And then everything here is on, a different team, but, like in between themselves, they're like pretty similar, right? So, that's, I think, what you want to keep in mind. And then again, look for similarities before differences. Like when you have the outline of this foot, notice here, it's like you're having like a big bump and a big bump and a big bump. But when you look over here, the bumps are there, but they're a lot more subtle. This like barely sticks out from that, right? It's like you have, again, a sock that's stretching over this, or like saran wrap. And so you want to lead with that, like again, squint down, make this simpler, make it more even, make it less different. And then afterwards you can like pop it out however much you need. But I think you're going to find that you need to pop it out less than you think. It might just be literally this much. But these little ripples along the form are not as important as the big organization. So like, again, think of, as if this were a pond or like the ocean. Think of the water level first, and then think of the little waves.
And it's also like, no one is good enough to nail those those curves on their, like, no one just like puts their pencil down and just hits all those curves. Like, so like, you're never gonna just be like, oh, I just need to get good. I need to get good. I just need to get better. Oh, I just have to get better. You're never getting better and hitting that. Like the person who is better just draws out the big line first and then puts in the bumps, because it's like really, it's just too hard. So it's like, why not even, don't even play that game,
Yeah. That's exactly right. Like one of the most important things about being a professional is like doing things with the least amount of effort because you always have too much shit to do. So like no one's handing out prizes for doing things in the most difficult way possible. Like you try to get away with getting the thing done with at least with as little pain as possible, you know, and you get to do more. And yeah, what Jake was saying is like, okay, look, if you come in and you simplify this, right? Um, Again, like Jake was saying, a lot of the activity or the most bang for your buck is going to happen like right along here, like where something changes. It's like if you're driving, down a straight road and it's empty, you probably don't have to pay that much attention. But if it's like a tight turn, then you have to pay attention. So, you know, cruising through here, like, this is fine, this is fine. Here, when it gets to like a change, then we have to like, you know, eyes wide open. So for instance, here, if you squint down, you'll notice that the shadow goes down here and then it stops, right? Or it kind of skirts around. And then you feel the roundness of this. This is, you know, now we're starting to separate it a little bit. You know, this is what's happening here is the same thing that's happening at the outline where we have one form and then it hops to another form. So we have bump, bump, bump. And then, you know, this form stops and then there's another form that cuts into it. So now you have like, you know, 3 forms that are, you know, identifiable. You have like one form, you know, another form in here and another form in here. So it's like a nice little, you know, like 3-piece right there. But
and now that you see that kind of heel coming into that middle part, like now you like that half tone on the bottom of that heel is super, super subtle. But now it's really easy to see, you know, that is just like a little bit of rounding on the bottom of that heel where it inserts into the middle of the foot. It's just a small amount of tone, very easy to put in along the bottom of that section. Wish we could draw on the same canvas somehow. We could do it on Magma sometime.
That would be great. I think, I think Zoom might have like a feature somewhat like that. Because what Jake was saying is like, it's pretty easy. Once you have this like fairly evened out, then you can just be like, oh yeah, there's a little step down here.
Yep.
And, you know, if eventually you wanted to, you could be like, you know, there's a little separation in the middle of the foot. But it's like, it's so small that it's like barely worth your time. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's almost like almost imperceptible. It's like really hard to notice. Mm-hmm. So anyway, but yeah, I would say that's the main thing here. These are great. I would just say like, you know, don't feel like you have to do all of these like changes all at once right here, like all of these little things. Again, try to group stuff together more. So like, don't separate it out so much so early. Maybe like group all that together into one thing. And then like afterwards, if you need to, then you can like separate it out. But big similarities first. The changes that you see are not as important as you think they are. You know, don't miss the forest for the trees.
Mm. All right, let's pull the next one.
The next one.
I threw some bargs in here. You know, we don't gotta go super in depth, but I just wanted to, you know, like, what do you think about, like barg feet and how to approach this stuff?
Yeah,
because I think it's a good example of like that switching mindset where you're like, okay, I'm doing a barg, I'm gonna do it this way. Okay, now I'm doing a foot study, I'm gonna do it this way. I'm doing a figure, now I'm gonna do it this way. You know?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about the barg plates is that like people have like a system for how to do them now, and it's like they tape the thing next to it and they do it in graphite or whatever, and it's like the funny thing is that people are really strict about that, but that's not even how people used to do them back in the day. It's like actually entirely wrong. Like, so it's like, you know, basically, you know, as long as you're, you know, like extracting information from these drawings, like as long as you're learning something from them and you're not just like doing them like kind of like on automatic, you'll get something valuable from this. And here, I'll just copy image here and paste it in. Because a lot of the accuracy stuff is just being careful, which is fine. I mean, that's like, you know, it has, you want a baseline of that, but you don't necessarily want to be like obsessive about it. So the main thing here is like, if you look at like a barg setup like this, like he's basically like this part right here isn't even drawing. This is just a guideline, right? And you know, it's like the same again as if you're driving on the road, right? There's like, you know, like markers on the road, and you know, you kind of, but you can like, you know, you can swerve a little, right? And it's the same thing here. These are like suggestions, like almost if you put like a plastic bag over that foot, like overall, like what would be the container for that, right? But basically he's doing that so that you don't have to worry about like this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And instead you're like, if you squint your eyes or if you look at it from far away, you're like, yeah, but it's mostly that, right?
Mhm.
And then the rest of the stuff is not that big of a deal. It's like, oh, this goes a little bit under. Oh, this goes a little bit over. Oh, a little bit under, a little bit over. But that just gives you like a kind of like a ruthless, like just sort of like simplification of it. So you have something to start with. That's really all it is. In terms of like, the bark drawings themselves, like this is kind of like a simple little setup. I think one of the important things to gain from this is like, look at how he overlaps this stuff, right? Like you get such a clear sense, actually what we were saying before of like, the outline and the shading supporting each other where it's like, oh, this is like a whole connect the dots thing. This is like a whole like, form right here. And then there's like this whole form, right there. And there's like another form back here. He's basically showing you that, there's like a form for that big toe and it has a little flat spot here, right? And it has like this kind of rounded, almost like cylindrical tip right here. And that there's another form behind that like this, right? And then that fits into, look at what he's doing here. He's like showing you around that kind of little cylinder piece here basically for the bone, right? Something like that. And, he's showing you how like, oh, this is wider and this fits into it. And then this comes out from there, right? In the same way, obviously this is like a really, like crude diagram, but the same thing's happening here. You're like bump, a bump, a bump, a bump.
Mm-hmm.
So, Barg is really good at all that stuff we talked about where it's like, he'll start this stuff out really simple. Like maybe here you would start just with like, okay, this is the side of this foot, and it's just like, a relatively flat side. And then into that, you start to find like, oh, hey, there's like a little subform here and there's a little shadow here and there's a little subform here. So it's not straight anymore. Now it just like has these, little forms, kind of changing things a little along the way in the same way that you did that for the outline. Like the outline and the inside forms, they follow the same basic ideas because the outline's not really a line. We draw it with a line, but it's just the limit of these forms, just like the outer edge of them. So I think
one
like
thing that I want to jump in with is we talked about this the other week, and it blows my mind the way that people, treat bargs. These drawings were made by a variety of different kind of teachers from the French Academy, and then they were turned into these plates. They were carved by, or I'm not sure if it's a lithograph or what the process is, engraved by Barg. So in that process, the lines are cleaned up and perfected.
Yeah.
So it's important to note that this isn't the drawing. It's the perfection tracing of the drawing, basically. So it's kind of like one of those grid method things where if you try to chase that accuracy wasn't even ever there, so you're chasing, ghosts or shadowboxing some demons, some French Academy demons.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, because, Barg, like, they handed him the drawings. I think they're done like by, like just random students of like cast and like the teacher selected. And he had to clean them up and like reverse engineer the drawings. Mm-hmm. So of course, when you look at his lay-ins, it's like, oh my God, this is so clean. This is so perfect. And he just like never misses. And it's like, that's not true. Like actual, drawings from the schools in France or from that period are messy a lot of the time. They have like a bunch of erasing. They have a bunch of like people trying stuff and being like, oh my God, how am I not getting this? So yeah, like don't be too literal about the Barg plates. Like, I would say like, don't sweat too much. Like if you end up making like, obviously you're not going to make like the toes or the body of the foot like bigger on purpose, but if you miss it by a little bit, that's fine. Like what you want to learn from these drawings is you want to learn how to like set up some guidelines for yourself, right? So that you're not just like coming in and just like going in like,
for drawing, or can we settle for an intuit?
Off the top, like doing these little like, small lines and stuff. So you want to give yourself some guide.
Let me show this. This is one of my favorite examples. Oh, yeah. And Ramon, you had some, you found some old Barg drawings from students back in the day too, and they were bad. They were really bad. Do you have them somewhere? Do you know where those are?
Yeah, I can pull those up. Here.
And this is by an American student at the French Academy, Kenya Cox. This is a beautiful drawing. This is great. These forms wedge into each other super well. It's really well executed. The halftones are good. The anatomy's good. And every time I'm like getting mad at myself because I'm not perfect and I'm not good enough. I remember seeing this drawing because when you zoom in on it, look at Kenyon. He's messing up. He's fucking up like 20 times. Like he's this leg was all the way out here, or look how many times he adjusted and moved the shoulder and this arm in, over and over. It's a mess. It's a disaster. This is like what drawings actually look like.
He always misses. Like
yeah. Yeah, totally. Someone just are you pulling that up? Someone just donated.
Oh, nice.
In and out again. Thanks. I love our Saudi benefactors, our oil princes in the audience. He said, "Is a Cintiq better for drawing, or is it okay to settle for an Intuos?" I actually really like. I tried to get them to sponsor me, but they weren't. Super interested. I actually really like Huion and XP Pen too. They sell basically the same product for like a fifth of the price, and you can, you could get like a $700 like Intuos, or you could get like a $700 like Huion or XP Pen, and the XP Pen would be like a full giant like 4K screen or 2K screen, and they're unless you're like working in a professional studio and you need like 20 setups that are all exactly the same, then you don't need to do that type of stuff. So. And also
I'm using an XP Pen right now. Like
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Let me.
I have the stuff pulled up if you want to see it.
Yeah.
So these are like actual like bargs that were done in the 19th century, and these have gone up for sale in eBay. Like bargs were copied with charcoal and Conte crayon because those were the standard tools at the time. You do it in charcoal first so that you can erase stuff if you don't like it, and then you reinforce it.
For people.
Yeah, and then exactly. Yeah, not charcoal pencils, but like like the charcoal that you can actually erase.
Look at this head.
Yeah, look at this like little wobble guy. But there are things that like they're learning. Like he's learning the same thing that we were talking about, which is like the bump, bump, bump. But it's like the little bumps inside of like an overall lineup, right? Like an overall guideline, so they don't pop out too much. But like they were wobbling all over the place, and you'll notice these are not shaded with little lines. I actually have a book from that time that says like, well, yeah, of course, like the barg plates have lines on them because they're lithographs, like he drew them on a stone. But like, it's understood that when you copy them as a student, you're copying them with a blending stump and like charcoal and crayon so that you can erase it and you're not making the little lines. I've only seen a couple of examples of people actually mimicking the lines in a barg drawing. And it was like from a German academy, which were famous for being like really sort of rigid and like just caring about the small stuff. And
maybe
not,
some of the Spanish. I think the Spanish were a little bit more on that graphite, delicate side too.
They were sometimes, yeah. But like when people would go to France, the French would be like, "No, we're not doing any of that. You're gonna stump this thing, like wipe it in there, and just make sure it's like the size that you need, and make sure it all like relates to everything else." It's like having a team. Like not every team member has to play like an amazing game to win. They just have to work well together, right? As opposed to having like a bunch of amazing players, let's say soccer players, all working like independently. Like you're not going to get anywhere if they're all like not working with a common purpose. But yeah, look, these bargs, they're messy. This person left like a guideline in there. They're like not as neat and clean as the ones that you see in the like in the actual barg book. Like even this one that's pretty.
What's the seal at the top?
Oh, it's just I think it just says that it won a prize. Here, let's go ahead and rotate this. Says figure year 1870, first class after the print, so after like barg, and first prize by Ernest Robelin. But yeah, these were like from like little regional schools. They would like make like mostly like kids copy these things. Yeah. Even this one that's pretty polished, it's still like still like a little sketchy. You can see where he erased a bunch of stuff right there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, also the bargs weren't for the people in the French Academy, really. The people in the French Academy were just drawing from the cast and drawing from life. And, the bars were really kind of for kids, for the most part, or smaller schools, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And to sell to other countries.
Yeah, true. Yeah, true.
One of the best bar collections is like in Puebla in Mexico, because they just like bought up a bunch of these like French drawings. They're like, okay, time to learn. But yeah, if you went to like a you know, the École or like a big French school in Paris, they'd be like, you have a cast right there. What do you need what do you need this in between thing for? But yeah, like, so what I would say here is like, don't worry so much about polish and don't worry too much about like all these small things. But when you're starting out, like, focus more on like, okay, like the overall thing, and focus on like, let's say, you know, if you're going to put in this tone, like focus on like the overall thing that you're getting here. Don't be in a rush to jump into like, you know, these like, you know, smaller forms here, but instead, you know, in the beginning, like take a step back from your drawing. You know, maybe like you can hold out your pencil to see that you match the angle here, because the angle here is starting to straighten out, right? And what'll happen is, you know, it'll start, in this case, as you're straightening it out, you're making like this top part of the, you know, well, not the foot, but like the leg kind of longer and longer, right? So, you know, you want to take some time where like maybe you like step back and you look at the stuff. Maybe you think of it in 3 sections. You think of this, this, and this. And you look over here on yours and you're like, okay, like this one's like about half as big as that one. Let's see if we, you know, if we look at it, does that hold true? Like, okay, and then maybe this is here. Oh, this segment's a little bit long, right? Like if you took this one here and put it in here, more than 2 would fit. So like you almost like ask yourself like, you know, what kind of like little rectangle does this form? What kind of little rectangle does this form? This is like a long one, this is a medium, and this is a little triangle. Like, does my little triangle here match? Okay, yeah, that matches pretty good. Does my little rectangle here match? Not quite. This rectangle is longer than this one. And then what about this one? This one's longer and skinnier than this one is, right? So basically, it's almost like don't draw so much and just like take more time to like step back and look at what you're doing. Like that, you know, that will make your life a lot easier. Like drawing is less about like actually moving your hand and more about like, you know, choosing what you want to do and then making sure that you stay on track. That's like the most important stuff. But the small things that you're doing in drawing here, like the micro scale stuff like this, like, you know, the actual like matching of these smaller angles, you're doing really, really well with. I would say, again, just the main thing is like, even as you're shading, like try to get this takeaway from it. Try to connect the dots. Like how does this connect to this, right? How does like, you know, something that happens in the shading, how does that relate to like what's happening in the outline? I think that, you know, you'll be able to get more out of the bar drawings by approaching it that way. Just kind of asking why. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let's move on to, I sent you that super constructive rotation chart.
Yeah.
And then we'll do a couple more like of the more technical ones. I think they're like further along in the rendering process. And
yeah.
We'll do mine just to make fun of the teach a little bit. And
all right.
Call it a day.
All right, sounds good. Okay. This is really impressive. Like, you know, but that is so many feet. Oh my God. You know, I think sometimes what can happen, I mean, obviously this stuff is really valuable, right? And it's like, it's useful to, you know, kind of like deconstruct this and kind of think of it in terms of like, you know, kind of like drilling these sort of like mechanical parts, right? But I do think there can be such a thing as like too much of this, right? Where it's like, you kind of like got the point of this, like, you know, 100 drawings ago. Like, and this is more almost like a presentation kind of drawing. You know, I think that, again, having an understanding of this almost like as mechanical parts is useful up to a point, but like, you're not going to be drawing like robot people in the end most of the time, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, there has to be like a kind of reconciling of this model with like real life, or like taking like the practical parts of this. So I think like, you know, if you're looking at some like constructive diagrams like this, it's like maybe doing like this much of it periodically will be good enough for you. And then try to apply it to actual feet. And like try to see, like, don't just draw these forms like the same way every time. try to see how they actually apply to like a real foot. Like, how do they show up slightly differently for like different people? Because what can happen is like you can get really attached to this idea that like I always draw like this part of the ankle like this, and I always make this little like chevron thing right here, and this is always round, and this is always like that. But like, you know, that's not really what like most people's like actual feet like look like, right?
It's a huge amount of variation, and some of these simplifications are just they're you know, by the way, like I probably could not rotate this form this well. I just want to say that before I give any critique. But regardless, like it's these simplifications, like they're not going to map on to reality as much. You know, it depends on your goal. Like I looked and I saw that this person's part of the modern day James Discord as well, since I'm in that one, and I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. You know, like it's a super different like other spectrum of the drawing that does revolve around like commercial work and being able to do like these illustrations or animations and being able to draw the figures in different perspectives. You know, like this type of stuff is helpful, especially when you're not like drawing reality so much. You're just trying to like, you know, create that kind of figure out of your head. But you know, you can learn a lot of these simplifications through reality too, and a lot of times you can make them a lot more flexible and you know, much more organic too, versus like pulling them out of, you know, whatever constructive anatomy book.
Yeah, like because even when people are doing stuff for animation, like I have a bunch of friends in animation, like I've never seen any of them take it this far. You know, it's like most professionals that I know, like if you bring this up to them, you're like, okay, rotate a foot, and every rotation be like, what the hell? You know, it's like the standard is not that high. Like you don't have to actually like there's other things that you could be studying at that point, you know? But what I will say here too is that like, again, you want to be somewhat careful with these, because again, it's like, it's kind of flooding your brain with like a lot of stuff to do that feels like, you know, you're like, yes, like I'm feeling like I'm getting something done, but it's like, again, there's other things that you could be concentrating on. So like, for example, you know, here you could have like, you know, like just like a clearer corner for where that is, rather than just like, you know, just like purely a cylinder. But also, there's just like simpler ways to do this. Like, let's say we take like this foot here, right? It's like, again, if you were to just like keep it sort of simpler, and let's say you know, just make this little platform thing, right? And only separate it when you need to. So you basically have like, you know, we don't even put in the corners yet because we don't need to yet, right? But you basically have this, and you have like, you know, a little box like that, you know, or like a little like, you know, leg model. But it doesn't have to be like, you know, like it's not this literal. It's not like I am robot thing, you know? You just kind of imagine like a little lump of clay, right? And let's say you take that and you're like, okay, let's go ahead and now we can divide this into 3, right? But you're not like necessarily like this pops out and this pops out. Like you're not making it super different just yet. You know, let's say you go in here and let's say you feel out this form. Let's say you put in, again, like a little, like the thickness of this, right? Like it's a sandal, you know, it has like a sole on it, right? And join all that together. And let's say this is going to be, you know, a foot from the outside. I guess this one's from the inside. We can let's backtrack. We'll do it from the inside too. Okay, so let's say, okay, now it does curve this way, like this. You know, let's say we have that, and again, we have it segmented, you know, like this, and segmented right there. You know, what you can do is you can just think of like, you know, there's a little bit of that in here too. Like it's like an old phone where you have like, you know, the receiver and the speaker or whatever, and then you have, you know, that bridge in between. Okay, we can come in and we can carve that out of here, right? And we can draw the back of like the heel and everything, pretty much like how you would draw like, you know, the that little cup part of like high heels, right? So, okay, we can come in and round that over like this, and then round this a little bit, and then bring it back up. And here, we only need to like, separate this out again as much as we need to. So, okay, this is, fine right here. We get the side there. The other thing you might need here is the tendons form a little ramp, because if you just have like this and this, it feels a little too like mechanical. But the tendons that go into the toes actually form like a little space in here. I got to move that over a little bit. But they form a little small ramp. And that helps it so that it's not like a robot, like boom, boom, like that. It's like boom, boom, and then ease through here. It helps to like, smooth this over.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you have...
Just real quick, like, if this person's goal with all this constructive stuff is to do more stylized or animation or like that illustration stuff, like these are like the big ideas that you want to pay attention to, because you need to push that stuff more. Like, if all you practice is that super robot-y stuff, you're going to have a harder time connecting those pieces together, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, this stuff is useful. I just think it's too much of it. So it's like, when you have a foot like this, like there needs to be like, before you start like slicing it up into a lot of parts, there needs to be like more of that feeling of like the driving movement, more of that feeling of like, a foot inside of a sock. Because like the body is elastic, right? It's like we have all this padding, we have all this stuff that like makes us kind of bendy. And so, it's like having a really rigid mechanical model is useful for a little bit, but it's like training wheels. Like you have to wean yourself off of it. And here we can do just add the sandal strap, and then you get, the big toe, and then the smaller ones in there. But it's really like little things like this, like, having those little threads that like connect the parts together, and not feeling the need to necessarily always have it be like, really like super squared up or super like mechanical everywhere. Because again, there's some stuff like this where it's like, it's starting to not look that much like a foot, right? So, here you would need like the tendon ramp in here. So I would say almost like do fewer drawings, but, you want to put like more time, into each of them, and just kind of like, switch up this model, like have this lead into this a little bit more. Maybe like that. This can just be, this little thing going around like this little bundle. Here, we'll clear this up. And then the outside here is just going to have this pad, which you can break up into more pads, but, for now, this is fine. There's the little cup thing behind, for the heel. And then, in here, like, don't make this just kind of squared up like this. I guess this is maybe without the toes, but I would say, feet usually have the toes built in, so you might as well like include them on here.
How do you arrive at kind of the simplifications, like your cup and stuff like that? This is it's difficult. There's a million sources out there, and yeah.
It's just by like comparing stuff, or like it's just like connecting the dots when you're working. Like one thing that I notice is that like if I look at a foot, like let's say I'll just pull up like an academic drawing. If and let's see one of these in here. Like if I look at this academic drawing is beautiful, and it's like pretty like complex looking. I think people think that it's like super polished, but when you get up close, it's like this dude doesn't even have like eyes. It's like it's pretty rough overall, and it's as good as it needs to be. But yeah, when you look at stuff like the feet in here, you notice that like you'll see sometimes just looking at real life, you're like, oh, this is at an angle. Like all these little like dashes and little dots, like the way that this heel joins the body of the foot, it has like a little angular cut, and it's kind of round back here, and it like, kind of rounds over here. So I just saw that and I was like, oh, that looks like someone wearing high heels, because like that's why the back of like high heels looks like that, because it has to accommodate like this little structure, right? And then, you start to notice that like, oh, over here it also looks like it has like a little diagonal cut, right? So then I just thought like, oh, well, turns out there's a muscle or a couple of muscles that go this way, right? And that's why it looks that way, because like the muscles that pull on the toes to make them like to make them like grip, right, are placed back here. They're like little violin strings. They go from here, they go around the ankle, and then they end up on the underside of the foot. So it's like, oh, there's a reason why that like looks like that. We don't need to we don't need to know the reason at first, but it's just kind of like noticing patterns and like making like associations. But yeah, if you guys look at this, like this is a foot on like a finished prize-winning academic drawing, and it's like, you know, how much information is really there, right? Like no toenails, like just the simplest possible forms, just like the leg, the body of the foot, you know, just like overall the big toe, and like this kind of ramp underneath. You know, if you look at this other foot, this is sort of what I was talking about, where it's like, you don't want to break it up too fast. You want to think of like just the kind of like, again, inside of a sock. Look at how, even with these details, if you zoom out, like how much this stuff lines up, how much there's like a movement from like the leg straight into that like little toe, you know, almost uninterrupted. And then if you look at here, there's like little, you know, like small interruptions, but they don't take away from like the larger pattern.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Lenny said in chat, which is a good observation actually, the cool thing about the foot is the gestural flow of thinking about the heel as a separate volume. You know, the lower legs flow into the toes, just like the forearm flows into the fingers, and then the heel is kind of like this this bony form that's blocked onto the bottom. So I think that kind of reinforces your high heels analogy as well. Like that shoe kind of flows out into the toe, and then you have this, you know, this structural arch on the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's here's an idea for you guys. Like you can think of it as because that's true. And you know, for anyone who's like maybe curious, like what they're saying is that like all of this like here flows together, and then there's like odd man out over here, right? Which makes sense. Like the most important part of the foot, at least for a lot of things, basically is this, right? That's why like when you have like prosthetics for running, you know, you just have like the blades and they don't have like a heel. You know, because you can run without like having this, right? And you can run better than like, you know, people run with like their, you know, factory setting feet, right?
Yeah, or like figure skating too. You're just like
that's
pushing off your toes.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and you know, obviously for like day-to-day like shock absorption and stuff, like, you know, this is obviously necessary. But like in my head, that's like what I see. Like those are like the main structures that I'm looking for. But if you think about it, this is like not that different from like a hand, you know, and like the heel is just the thumb, right? And so
I love how cursed these things get. It's especially too my favorite one, and I've said this before, I'll say it a million more times, is like if you look at like four-legged animals, they have the same kind of bone structure too, where they have one big upper arm bone, and then they have two smaller lower ones. They're just rearranged, but horses and cows and stuff, or especially horses, they walk on their hoofs, right? And their hoofs are what do you call it, keratin or whatever, that kind of material. They're big fingernails, and they're not walking on their feet, they're walking on individual toes. So they have four little fingertips that horses walk around with giant fingernails on there. It's the same bone structure, it's just crunched up in a bunch of different ways. And that relates to everything too.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like you know, that's another thing that's like, since we were talking about studying in general, like the more you can figure out that a lot of things are the same, or they have like a lot of points in common, the fewer things you have to study. So if you start seeing these common points between like hands and feet, then like, you know, when you're drawing hands, you're learning about feet. When you're drawing feet, you're learning about hands, you know? And you're right, like once you, let's say the first like animal that you know, have a good grip on in terms of anatomy is the hardest one, like whether that's like a person or whatever else. But if you learn human anatomy, and again, not to a crazy degree, but just things like this, you'll have a head start in like drawing like other animals, because like a lot of stuff is pretty similar, you know.
We want to jump to the next person.
Yeah. Let's
I
do that.
sent you. You got one more in your Discord DMs. I think this is a nice jump towards the more like finishing, smaller forms, how things interact with light, which we can kind of get into a bit.
Yeah, these are great. Okay, just open these up. Or these like little Bugro feet.
Yeah, we have a whole bunch of Bugro reference photos in the challenge thread.
Oh, nice.
Just some of our interesting Discord members already have that collection available, so it's just repurpose.
It's like a crippling addiction they have. Like, just the more Bugro references. It's understandable.
Well, he made so many paintings that you just have a full reference library of anything you could ever want.
Yeah. I was walking behind someone one time, and they had like a tattoo on their back that was like kind of poking out of their shirt, like into their neck. And I was like, why does that look familiar? And then I realized it was Bouguereau's like Cupid and Psyche. Just like a full, just a full like tattoo of that. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like, even if they don't know who Bouguereau is, it's like,
they might not.
He's like in the cultural now. Well, a lot of tattoo artists will use like just like old paintings and stuff to like as reference. One of my friends like recreated, like he had like a photo shoot with a model and recreated like a version of Bonnat's Crucifixion, just for like, for someone's like tattoo, which is pretty sick. Okay, so let's take a look in here. Yeah, this is really good. I like this a lot. That's why like some of this older stuff like this looks like it's like a David or something from that era.
Yeah,
like,
it's from one of these Russian sites, Practicum. So it probably is some David.
Yeah, or like just some other neoclassical thing. But this stuff is really good to study because, it's so clear, like just all the stuff we were talking about where it's like, okay, you have like this little bundle right here, right?
It's from Mogilevsev's book. That's what it is. So yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, okay. He has great examples in there. Like he just really went through like all the the whole catalog.
And
this is so good.
His constructions were to me the most helpful because they are like pretty planar. Maybe more than you would even do, but they were far more direct and applicable and understandable, like transferable to the stuff I was working from after drawing them than a lot of the more complicated ones like the Bomis and the other anatomy books.
Oh yeah, like day to day you just don't need that much stuff. Like it's like it's easy to kind of think to yourself that like you need to know like everything about everything at all times, but that's just really not the case. It's like 90% of the time you're working with this like really basic knowledge and just like applying it over and over again, but you're not going to get into like all of these like tiny details or like almost no one's going to be asking for like all these veins and all that. But yeah, I like this old stuff because like this, again, it's almost like a little diagram where you can see like it's like you can almost color code these forms, and whatever you think of these like drawings like stylistically, it's like they're very clear as far as like for like learning, like in terms of like how the parts fit in. So yeah, I would definitely like recommend these. The Bouguereau ones are great too. They're just like a little bit more subtle. Like something like this is like really spelled out, and that is really really useful for us. Okay, so here what I would say is the seeking out of like the forms and how these things like bump into each other, that's really well done. I think the main thing that we would have to do here is be a little bit more systematic with stuff around the ankle. And we have to be careful that these values don't like get too jumpy. So if you squint down, you notice like, okay, the shadows are a certain value, the lights are a certain value, but nothing in the lights gets this dark. Like this is as dark as the shadows basically. Whereas if you look over here, yes, there's a darker tone here, but it's more similar to, the other tones in the lights than it is to the shadow. So, if it's in the lights, then, we try to keep it pretty light, so there's, they're more similar than different, the tones that are next to each other. If it's in the shadows, then obviously that can be like a pretty big jump there. But, inside each value family, let's say, or value group, you try to keep things like together as much as you can. Not just as like a thing that you're making up, but that's just what it looks like, generally speaking. So here, I wouldn't worry too much about again, these small changes in the form. Like if we took these away or just minimized them, you wouldn't really lose much of anything.
And really, are they even there in the painting? I mean, hardly even, and just some small
barely.
stuff, or like some veins, or a lot of it's color changes too, not actual value changes.
Yeah, exactly. And when you have a really, really subtle halftone like that, sometimes it's actually easier to just okay, to put in this part that's light here and this part that's light here, and that halftone just what's left over, rather than you having to put in that halftone that you can barely see. But again, you just want to set clearer priorities of what matters, right? The thing that I think is we're getting a little bit lost in the sauce here with some of this stuff. The fundamental fact we want to hold on to is that boom, this leg comes in like this, and boom, here's the foot, right? And so where that changes, that sort of big leg comes in, foot goes like that. You want to tell it to yourself in your head almost like you're a caveman, right? You do that, and then you start thinking about the things that connect this together, right? So what happened here is I think you were maybe thinking a little bit too much about these small changes in the outline. And so the ankle and all this stuff got pushed way back here in the foot, when that stuff should probably be around here, right? So that's the thing. It's you have to fight. People think that drawing is a skill thing. It's not. Not really anyway. Or not about manual skill, how steady your hand is or anything like that. Drawing is basically strategy and time management and just managing information. So, most of what you have to do to get quote unquote a good drawing or get what you want is not waste your effort on things that don't matter and focus on identifying the things that'll make the most impact. So if we move that over, what's happening now is that and you could have drawn it like this, where it's just focus on getting that overall tube of that leg in, just focus on getting this in. Maybe focus on getting where you want that heel and how this fits in. And then once you have you have this and you have this, then you can start worrying about oh, how do I bridge the gap? How does it squeeze or stretch in between these and then pop out? Or okay, how does it travel here? Okay, we have this form right here. And then pull this out to oh, okay, here's how it joins up with this. Mm-hmm. So that's simple. It doesn't look it's not a big change in on the paper, but it's a big change in how these things link up and how much room you have for this little cup part of this and whatever. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I would do. You have a lot of horsepower, you have a lot of ability. It's just your task right now is don't wear yourself out, sort of kind of what Jake was saying, just shadow boxing, ghosts, so here, try to focus on this and try to focus on how maybe this separates out from that.
The directionality of the mark was really good in this drawing. It's clear that they're searching for that.
Oh yeah, they're just getting a little sidetracked, that's all.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Exactly. That's not a thing that takes 30 seconds to correct. You just have to be hey, eyes up front, and then that's it. It's not oh, this will be an arduous journey of centuries to. No, you just have to you're paying too much attention to things that don't matter. Squint down, take a step back, and figure out what the important stuff is, and just do that. That's the biggest thing. But yeah, like what Jake was saying, like you don't necessarily want to be stuck like copying the outlines. You want to like almost like rebuild the person, right? So like, you're like reconstructing them.
Definitely.
So there will be things that are more important, like, these blocks, and then putting in like those tendons and stuff.
Without actually, I'd rather move to the next person than do both of these. Sorry to this.
Wait, sorry, say that again?
I'd rather move to the next person than do both of their drawings here.
Oh, sure. Okay,
just to keep things moving.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, we have a painted one here, or did we want to?
Yeah. Whichever one you want to choose from. I'm just sending you stuff that kind of fits in.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go ahead and take a look at these. Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll just choose like one.
Yeah, I think we can kind of try to rapid fire these, just so we can get to more people.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, so.
And really fundamentally, when I do critique, or when anyone does critiques, and this is just kind of one of those things you start to learn as you teach and see more, is you just see these patterns and really the same thing that you say to one person, you say to the next person pretty much the exact same way. We probably don't need to re-explain the whole story to every single person, but in even on the super advanced people, you still say the same thing. You're just kind of targeting it more specifically. With like the total beginner, you're like, okay, we just need to work on like this big sock. And then with the super advanced person, we're like, okay, these smaller forms could be more integrated, into this, medium-sized structure. But it's the same thing,
Yeah. It's funny because, like the beginning and the end are almost always like exactly the same, right? It's like you're training. It's like you start because you want to tell stories, then you get like caught up in all this like technical stuff, and you end telling stories again. And you start with the sock, and then you learn all this other like, stuff, like all these other bones and whatever. And then you realize that the sock was the most important thing all along. Yeah. But you kind of have to go through the journey to be like, it's like something out of a movie where like maybe home is where the heart is after you go on some like long trek like the Iliad or some shit. Like, so basically here, I wouldn't recommend doing like really elaborate drawings like this in pen. It's just kind of like asking for like pain. Like you kind of want something that is more forgiving. I mean, or if you do it in pen, then like, don't be upset if like you do something where you're like, oh shit, I went too dark, and then you can tell what you did that you didn't like, but you can't fix it. Like, I think having a medium that's more forgiving is like, useful, because again, knowing that you're like, I know what to do, but I can't do it because it's like, it's I can't erase this, is kind of frustrating. Okay, the overall like bend of this foot here, like the elasticity of it, that's really good. The planes, like, this like change in direction here, that's great. And even like the bumps in here integrate, pretty damn well. I think the main thing that you'd have to do is like, there is a little bit more like central planning that you can do with like some of this stuff, but also like if you're gonna hatch in, you could be, I think, a little bit more intentional about that and maybe keep the hatch areas bigger. So like, don't think of individual hatch marks. Think of what I tend to call the hatch patch. So like you hatch in like groups, right? It's like a brush stroke. It's like the same thing as like when I do that. Like you don't think of the individual lines so much, you think of like, right? It's like a little square of hatching. And that'll keep the hatching a little bit bigger, because here it's like, it's kind of carving things out a little too much. And here it starts to get like a little spaghetti-like. It's like, you kind of like want to pick up on a rhythm of like, here.
Also, just be nice to yourself and just do a pencil drawing first. Even like, you look at those like fantastic Fortuny pen drawings. Like he did a pencil sketch under those. Like, I think for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, even those like academic drawings in Conte have like a charcoal sketch underneath. Like you don't want to just come in here like with like, no rope, no wire, no nothing. Like just like, I don't know. It's just like, there's no reason to. But yeah, here what I would do is layer this a little bit more, because I think you're giving kind of equal importance to all these changes. So maybe you come in and you're like, okay, I hatch in here to get like the general roundness, of this like cylinder of the leg. right? And then inside of that, maybe you come in and you hatch, you change the direction a little bit. If you want to like get like that extra little change, right? Like instead of just like this, now it's like this and like this. But you don't want to like every small change. This is like a little bump on the surface. You don't want to like chop, 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 like turn it into like a hole. You know what I mean? Because things stand out from the main form, but not that much. It's like it's the same with color. It's like color changes on like a face or whatever, but not as much as you think. And so you want to conserve that effort. Otherwise, you're like a boxer or like an MMA fighter that like is just gassing out and not even hitting their target. It's like probably better to like pick your shots. Just like take a step back, don't move around so much, just sort of like strategize a little bit more. Maybe here like this comes in like that. And then, this is good here. You switch up the direction. But here, maybe you don't need to have like such like small little hatch marks here. It just gives you like too much work to do. Maybe like push on that a little bit more aggressively, just get that change. Here, this can be done with just like, fewer hatch marks, like just kind of bigger ones. This is nice, the way that this is like, going on here. But again, one of the reasons to use like a pencil or something else like that is like, here you have to like hatch and then stop at each of the tendons, then hatch, then stop. If you just use, like a pencil or something you can erase, you can have, that big plane, whether you do it with hatching or with tone, and then you can just erase the tendons out, and that makes life easier rather than having to like, start and stop and start and stop. Like right here, this tendon's like kind of like too much of a gap between this tendon and too packed together here. These are probably a little bit more evenly spaced, but because you're concentrating on doing all this little hatching here, you're going to lose sight of that. You're going to get like mixed up there. And so, I think here it's like, yeah, you could even plan this with a pencil drawing where it's like, you just give yourself like a little guideline of like where those little tendons are going to go. And then you can, hatch it out. But again, trying to just sort of one shot this like this is, it's pretty hard, and it's like the rewards that you get for that are like pretty minimal. So I wouldn't necessarily do that. Like, again, this is kind of like, again, these hatch marks are a little bit too small. There's too many of them. I would, again, even if you make small marks, think of like wind up your hand and like think of like the big form. Like even if we're just hatching like this little side right here, you want to like wind up over here and think of like how it's traveling over and then chop, chop, chop. So if you have a form like this, it's like you feel the whole form and then maybe just touch down there, but you're feeling the whole thing.
It's really hard because you want to hatch what you see, but it always comes out worse than if you just hatch the form. Like if you just hatch the big form and it's not exactly what you see, it always comes out stronger, and it's so backwards. But it is the you have to reconstruct it. You can't just like hatch it. It's very difficult to wrap your mind around.
Ramon exactly.
Drawing
like
a block of cheese.
No, it's a cake. It's a slice of cake. So imagine that you have cake that has sprinkles like this, right? And someone asks you to replicate that cake. Are you going to put in the sprinkles first and put the frosting around them, around every sprinkle? Or are you going to, put in the frosting first in a few like broad strokes and then add the sprinkles on top of that? Like, would you literally add the frosting like this around the sprinkles? Of course not. That would be crazy. But that's more or less what people do in drawing, where they try to like make the smallest little things and then like, have to skirt around them. And it's just not fun at all, I promise. Like it's like trying to clean a tile floor with a toothbrush instead of with a mop. So yeah, I think that's probably like the main thing. You sort of like try to think a little broader.
Let's skirt to the next one. We got a painted one here. Is this the linen one?
Yeah,
it was. It's a linen offcut though. They didn't go all out. They just had a little scrap. They put the cast in a light box, so I think they actually own this cast.
Oh, nice. Well, sorry, this is cut crooked, so we can't look at this.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, never mind. No, this is great. That's one thing that's like nice about like switching up medium sometimes is like, because you draw with a pencil, and like a pencil has like a point, like people think that they have to do all these like small little wiggly things, or like it kind of like encourages that. It doesn't have to be that way, right? Like you can think broadly and just work on like the big overall things without having to resort to like these tiny little marks all the time. But the medium doesn't stop you. Whereas with painting's pretty clumsy as a medium. Like, especially if you use like a big square brush, it's like it doesn't let you kind of noodle around so much, which I think can be a really helpful thing for people, or like working in clay for a little while. Like that is, if you're getting too fancy with like your mark making and stuff, it is helpful to just have like just some medium you're not like even that familiar with, or that's like inherently kind of like chunkier. And that actually makes a whole difference, because you have to focus on the ideas. You can't do your fancy little handwriting anymore. You have to like actually focus on the substance. So
this is
yeah,
great. I really like how like blocky this one is. This is really,
yeah,
this is fun.
Yeah. Here, there's a really good job on just like making the shadow like purposeful. So like the shadow's like it's traveling over these forms, right? It's going like side to side. Now it's going like front to back, and then the way this stops, it suggests that this form fits into that. Like that's awesome. Like that's the kind of stuff you want to be thinking about pretty much every time you're drawing, because again, what you're doing is you're thinking about like space, right? This is good too. It's like it's very clear that this goes in, and then boom, this comes out from here. I would say here, just like be careful that you're maybe not breaking this up like too much. Like this is a little jumpy right here. I would maybe like unify that a little bit more. The places where things bump into each other, you can like work on this a little bit more. Tighten this up so that this suggests like a little bit more of like the roundness of this form as it doubles back, things like that. I really like this too, like this coming out like here, and even like the brushstrokes seem to be going in that direction. That's really great too. I think like here, look, you can like tighten up the corners a little bit just to get like the turns even tighter. It's like when you're putting in the screws on a chair, like an IKEA chair or something, where it's like you put them in kind of loose, and then you give them like the final like couple turns to tighten them, just to make sure that it's like still a pretty good chair, but you make it even sturdier. I think that's kind of what you want to do here.
Do you recommend like trying to keep an edge like that really sharp from the beginning, or is that something you're going to come back and reinforce later on?
I think you can come back and reinforce it later on, like because as you're working with like a big chunky brush, like you're gonna lose most of it anyway. So you can keep it like sharp-ish, but just don't like obsess over it. One thing I would say here, okay, this is coming down like this. This is good. I think the placement of these like ankles, like we could take a look at, like because like one bone is higher than the other one, but not that much, right? So like I would try to like look across here, and maybe the other one would be like down here, right? Because again, you look for similarities more than you look for differences, or at least like the differences are like a little 5% change from like whatever's similar. Like they're just like, if you say like, oh yeah, this is like offset, this is higher than this, it's probably only a little bit. They're like mostly in the same place or whatever. So that's something that I would try to do. Like, don't just like if you're drawing this or painting this, look at the other side as well. Like, don't try to do stuff in isolation. Like, if you're putting in the values for this toe, you're still looking at the whole thing to see how that toe like works together with everything else. Like, it's never just like on its own. But so that's what I would say here. I think this is awesome. Like, I would honestly, with this, I would just mostly like keep going, like do another one, you know, or like do a couple different like turns of that. Because what'll happen is here you're starting to see that, like, again, this bundle kind of goes around like this. This form fits in here. Oh, we got a visitor.
Oh, I
don't know if you guys can see him.
He just jumped up in the chair.
Yeah, he sure did. So here again, you're noticing as you're painting that, like, this form is going around like that. If you, let's say, do another view of this foot, it'll just reinforce the idea as you're working. Let's say you do like a front view or something like that. You know, I'm not opposed to doing turns, you know, it's just that like I don't think you need to do like so many of them. Like you know, just a couple is fine. But you know, if you draw it from like the front, you might see like, oh, you know, like maybe you'll see this coming in like more clearly, or you'll see like a half tone over here that like really shows how it cuts in on this side. And then, you know, you just get like, you know, a slightly different, maybe clearer view on some things that you only kind of saw from like another angle, you know. But I think that would be helpful, like in just kind of like, you know, your understanding of how these like forms fit in together. But the way you're tackling this is really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm a fan of this one.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
It's, Carmen sketches next. Oh yeah, some people included a little time lapse too.
Oh, okay, let's watch that real quick.
I want to scrub through it. It's something I asked for on the Bouguereau copy, because it's like, you know, there's a lot of ways to arrive at the end goal. You know, with this one it's looser, and like, you know, Carmen's like sketching in a very characteristic way here, so it's not like it's, you know, the process is pretty well. But with something like a really technical Bouguereau copy, I care a lot more about how somebody gets to that end result than I do about, you know, the accuracy of the end result.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah, because it's like an exercise in like how to think about like something. I think like these are interesting because they're very like appealing, like they're really cool looking, you know.
Carmen's a great 3D sculptor, so I think that's why.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the logic is really interesting.
Yeah, like the and just like the mark making, I think is like super cool. The main thing I would say is like, if you're trying to just like study, then like the method itself is maybe like a little complicated, like, or you don't necessarily want to break it down into like that many things before you get going, or before you like add tone. Like, if you already know that you're gonna add tone later, you know, then I would probably like, you know, again, keep some of this stuff like more together. Like, you know, basically, I mean, it's, you said Carmen does 3D, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this, like, the simplest drawing process, and particularly for studying, is basically treating it like it's subdivision surfaces, where it's like, you know, you get a few polygons in there, you do what you can with them, then you divide it up, and now you have more polygons to move around, and okay, you do that, and then you just keep like chopping it up. But you know, so it depends. Like, I think the process and drawing style here is really beautiful. Like, it's just, you know, I think it's like more for like, you know, like personal or like finished work, because if you're trying to use that to learn, like, it's going to give you like too many things to think about, right? So that just depends, like, because, you know, it'll sort of make it so that you're like exaggerating some of these changes, or, you know, because your ability to see this stuff is great, right? But it's one of those things where like
probably pushing that like big sock idea in the beginning is going to be really helpful here, and not like, you know, breaking things down into like, you know, like step. It's almost a little bit better to like insert a couple of those planes where you need them, and you know, maintain the larger mass organically.
Yeah, and I think it's like, you don't have to break it down like you can have something like just like Jake was saying, like a guidepost like this, like maybe just like, okay, this is gonna go in here and this is gonna come out right here, and maybe like that's the big toe, and that's like that little step right there, and, you know, then you can come in. So basically, don't break it up so much like when you're doing the outline, but once you come in here and you're, you know, like really sculpting it, then you can have this kind of more like, you know, just kind of like energetic, you know, somewhat like more separate like way of carving this, right? But yeah, just like Jake said, it's like maybe keeping a little bit more, or erring more on the side of like unity and like the kind of underneath thing, you know, and then you can just kind of like, once you have that container, you know, you have like the guideline for that, then you can just kind of go ham on this stuff out here. And yeah, I think that would be like kind of like best of both worlds. Because again, it's not like there's one method for like, you know, like doing studies or whatever. The only reason why, you know, I suggest certain things is like, I think it's like keeping things manageable is really important. So like, however you have to do things so that you don't get like too much to do, like, and get overwhelmed. That's kind of the way that you want to do things. But there's certain things here, like what you're saying, where it's like you want a certain clarity, in here. And you can have changes, like in the reflected light and stuff, but you just want to be like a little bit more systematic so that, so that the viewer can keep up. Like, it's like, when people have like really beautiful calligraphic handwriting, but it's like hard to read, it kind of like defeats the purpose, because ultimately, these things are like to communicate with other people, right? So, it can be sort of like more elaborate, but it has to be like legible. Like, ultimately, for studies, I would say maybe like clarity is the is like the kind of like the most important trait. Is that like, did you understand it? Like, did you make it clear for yourself, and possibly for whoever's looking at it. But yeah, like here, again, there will be places where this starts to like, for instance, it starts to get hard to see like where, the bottom plane ends, and let's say like, this side plane begins. So, just kind of taking some of the stuff and, making like a clear decision about like, okay, this is one plane, this turns up so it catches more of the light, kind of tying this together a little bit more.
The bottom of the foot has this group of values, and then the light on the bottom of the foot is, that kind of medium dark, and the dark is that black. But the side of the foot has this next level up group of values. So the dark on the side of the foot is that medium value, and the light is like white. So you have, these big groups first, and then, they can't butt up, they can butt up against each other, but as soon as they start to overlap, then you lose the plane.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I mean, yeah, you can literally like start with this and just keep it really like, separate, like really like sort of clean right there. And then, then you can come in and be like, okay, this gets a little lighter. Just as a treat, we can come and add a little bit more to this. But yeah, what you want to get in here is like, again, that feeling of space, of like the values that you use are like carving out the space. It's like putting in clay or taking clay away, or stuff like that, basically. But yeah, there's a lot of like really like just like beautiful moments in here, like the understanding of like the rhythm as like these toes come out, the flaring out of them, the structural quality of like this big toe, like that's awesome. Again, I think it's just like you kind of have to decide, if these are like studies or if these are just like, feet that you're sort of like stylizing for fun. And if you do want to like make it like a study thing, then again, a little bit of like slowing down and just having a few more guidelines would be useful.
Yeah.
All right.
We can pull up the next person. Ramon, I haven't forwarded you any. You can just go to the channel. That's where all the references are, by the way. If you click on the bottom, the Atelier thing, it'll take you to the thread with all the... This is the
like
thread
all the
with everything, just in case you needed that.
Cool. Yeah, there's a lot of classics in here. I always like this one, the Adolf von Menzel.
Oh yeah. Oh, speaking of that, there's a really great. We can do Canvas Engineer here. I just forwarded that one to you. He did a study of that one that's really good.
Oh, great. Here, I'll pull this up too. Canvas Engineer. I like that name.
He's a very charismatic painter.
Oh wow, yeah, that's awesome.
I'm sorry, I got a pee, so just hold down the stream, entertain the chat. If you need, just hit switch and manage all the audio and stuff like that. Good. We'll be back in like 30 seconds. If you do anything wrong, it's, everything will blow up. It's fine.
It's just, just death. Like, all right, guys, Jake's gone now. We can like actually start having fun. Let's see, gotta grab the other one here. You guys put in a lot of work. This is awesome. I haven't seen this kind of, foot devotion, maybe ever, actually. Oh, it did not copy over. But yeah, let me know in the chat if this is making sense to you guys. What's not making sense is why Photoshop didn't want to copy this over, but There we go. Do what we can. Yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look here. You know, again, just taking the time to like think and just kind of take things in is very like underrated. Again, like I feel like a lot of us feel like that rabbit in Alice in Wonderland where you're always like behind, you know? But a lot of the time, you know, with a complex task like this, it really does pay to like not just start like swinging immediately, but like okay, what are we looking at? What are we trying to do? You know, and then periodically like reminding yourself of that. Like you have a rhythm to how you work. Like, you know, you will be able to see the overall thing and keep track of that like when you first start out, and then your brain's gonna get tired. And then, you know, you're gonna start like just kind of putting in things that are too dark or too light or out of place. You have to take a break. You have to step back and like look at it from a distance. And then, you know, your brain recoups, you're able to see the big picture again. And then, you know, you just keep repeating that process. But it's not like you're either on or off. Like there's like little cycles that you have to go through. Okay, so yeah, so here, you know, the big idea is this foot is like, it's like blooming out of, you know, it's like growing out of this leg. It's like fanning out like that, right? And so that's something that we want to preserve over here. It's preserved pretty well for the most part, but, you know, for instance, like here the shadow gets pretty dark and that reinforces it. Here we can do more of that. You know, we can, oh, am I in the wrong layer?
The classic Photoshop locking the layer.
Yeah. Oh my God, why does not want to, hold on, even with my brush, it's not wanting to do anything. 1 second.
Yeah, you might have to restart. Yeah, there we go. Nice.
If I make a file that works for it, it's so stupid. I don't even give Adobe my money. Yeah, so anyway, here, this shadow like reinforces that, and so that's, you know, something we'd want to put in here. If you squint down, like that takes on like a whole lot of prominence. Like you can barely see this here if you squint down. It's actually like pretty dark, so we could actually take this down. And again, everything that you use here, whether it's like, you know, this shadow cutting into this or whatever, everything is working with a common purpose. So like everything just wants to come out, right? These little piggies want to air out, you know? So, okay, here, again, squint down to help you prioritize, you know, really what you're looking for are like themes, right? You're like, what's this foot doing? Like, what's the story here, right? Here, yes, there's that light part, but again, if you squint down, it's not as light as you think, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't get so light that it messes with the feeling of like this cylindrical leg, you know, coming in. And so, you know, here, notice these little bumps, they're starting to get out of range, right? Like if you, because you had it at first, right? You had this like big movement, but if you don't tend to it, if you don't like water it and keep track of it as you keep working, you're going to start to get stuff like this where, you know, if something sticks out this much from like the main thing, it starts to look like it's like a boil or like, I don't know, like just like a growth rather than just like a veiny foot, right? And so here, you know, yes, you can pop that out, but it's literally like a little does a lot, right? It's like salt. Like you know, I learned a lot about this stuff watching Chopped and like other like reality TV cooking shows. Like, you know, because like the fundamentals are always the same there, right? Yeah. Like it's like you can add as many fancy ingredients as you want, but if you overcook the steak, you overcook the steak. Like, let's say that like I'm cooking something for you, like let's say I'm making like I don't know, like a piece of chicken, right? Versus like a Michelin star chef. It's like there might not be like, you know, many more ingredients. Like we're effectively putting chicken on fire, right? Till it's like, you know, edible. But someone who knows what they're doing, like they might choose like a different setting for the heat. They might put it on for longer or for shorter. They might have like a different cut of like the meat or whatever. they might like let the meat sit out for, well, maybe not that, but shows how much I know about cooking. But it's
you
not
do
that
let
they
it
have
sit
like
out.
way more.
You got to let the steak come to room temperature so you can get a nice sear on it.
Oh, see, I
you're
was
right.
I
Trust
hopped
your
over
instinct,
to chicken.
King.
I was like,
Oh wait, maybe not chicken. Never mind.
yeah,
Unless you like it
chicken.
medium rare chicken.
Yeah, exactly. You want that like hallucinatory chicken. But the thing is that like it's not like necessarily they're going to be like adding more ingredients than like I am. They're just going to be more thoughtful about what they're doing, right? Like they're just going to make sure that it's. And the other thing is like no matter how many spices and shit you have, if you overcook the chicken or undercook it, you fucked up. Like that's that's probably the first criteria. The spices and whatever are important, but not as much as like not giving people salmonella. And the same is true with like painting, and drawing, where it's like, yeah, you can do all kinds of fancy stuff or whatever, but if you want something to like read or to be like to match, some existing thing, or you're studying something, you have to make sure that like the big ingredients are like well cooked, right? And like, ready to eat. And so, anything else that you do beyond that is like just kind of extra. But if those things are not taken care of, then, it's not going to go the way you want it to. So here, I was just like reinforcing some of the separation between the toes. If you look, like Mensel's really doing a bunch of work to like get this to turn around to really feel like cylindrical. And over here, it feels like a little bit more shapy. Like this, this crosses over further than it should. And because of that, it doesn't respect the kind of like cylindrical quality of this toe. So the shadow's traveling in this curved way because this part of the toe is like a cylinder, basically. So you want to make sure that whatever you do with brush strokes, like you're not just copying shapes, but the brush strokes that you put in are advancing the form. The form is, the big idea. The brush strokes and all that are just like little letters that you're putting in, to express that idea. But the idea is more important than the small components. And again, if you squint down, look at this right here, and look at this right here. Those are suggestions that like basically, because the toes are being like pulled up, that's pulling on the tendons, like little violin strings. And that goes from here all the way back, to the leg. And so here we get these little clues, these little indications of it. And we do want to put those in because those are like a major feature here. You can put it in just as like a big long thing like that, and then interrupt it along the way so it's not too obvious, and that's the easiest way to do it rather than peppering this in with like a bunch of small little things. The same thing's happening with the small toe. If you don't put that in relatively aggressively, it'll be easier to lose track of it, and to lose track of it in all this like zigzagging flesh. But you really want, like, if you're really trying to recreate the original, trying to learn from it, you want this thing. You want that in there, because that supplies this. Now, instead of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little marks, you think of just one big one, and then you just chop it up afterwards, right? You just think of like one big movement there, and then you zigzag across and dilly-dally and do whatever you want to make that not so obvious, so that people think you're just a painting magician, rather than painting your toes in one tendon at a time like the rest of us.
Yeah, that paint integration and like, pulling something over and then working the next piece over it, that's like the stuff that I tend to like not prescribe to people at the beginning, but it really does help. As soon as you like the drawing of this is good and the color's good, like there's like every piece of this is working, and like these are the types of advice that is really, really, really helpful, like actually getting to that next level of flesh or feeling to the painting.
Yeah, exactly. Like chances are, if you've been working for a bit, like you probably understand more than you think you do, and you might be like, oh, I need to like learn more about this or get more, whatever skill at this or that. But probably what's happening is like you're pretty good at a bunch of things, but they're not working together as much. So you need to like learn how to like, kind of drive the whole team, like integrate it more. It's like, again, you can have like any professional team has like professional players, say for basketball or for baseball or whatever. but probably part of what makes one team better than another one is how they're like managed, right? Like how like they strategize, how they like whatever, any one of them can like, make a like a 2-point shot or a 3-point shot. That's why they're there, right? But the pure sort of like horsepower or like the raw ability that someone has is only one part of the equation. How you manage that is also really, really important. So, all right. It's, but yeah, really, really, really nice.
Sweet. I sent you 2 more in the DMs. We got Mr. Toko here, put in a ton of work into a foot study.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I smell another Bugaro.
Yeah, here's our Bugaro appreciator. Number 1.
That's official title.
This is me.
Oh, nice.
Well, we can kind of cap off the stream with that.
Jacques Don't Draw. Who's that?
Some very old French artist. Possibly possibly a vampire.
Yeah, possibly a vampire. That's the best vampire status to have. Just gonna keep them guessing,
Yeah, well, you don't want, they'll stake you, If you've made it 150 years as a vampire, you're good at keeping it cool. Or I guess 200 years.
You can't give it up that easily to the ops, right?
Yeah.
All right, so this looks really good. Also, like very ambitious to tackle a Bugaro like this. It also looks like pretty direct painting, which is really, really cool to see. It feels pretty fleshy too.
Yeah.
What I would say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jake.
Oh no, I was just that's all. Yeah, I think Toko is really great at getting a nice fleshy feel while being super, super direct. Yeah. I mean, the guy's like very, very thick with the paint. It's fun to see.
Yeah, it's awesome. The color's really nice too. Like this is a good example of like keeping all this stuff together and not like putting in that many like unnecessary changes like in here. Like, if you're painting or whatever, Jake and I, we've talked about this a bunch of times, but it's basically the same as like someone doing like a full face of makeup where it's like you have the foundation, if you want to put in like whatever the reds like blush, then you can, right? You're kind of like toning the surface, and then you just go like, you do like the contouring, so you go like a step darker, and you do the highlights, and you go like a step lighter. But it's the same sort of like idea where like you start from some like middle base, then you can go lighter, and you can go darker from there, right? That's probably the easiest way to manage like any kind of shading in like a drawing or a painting. You just put down a base layer, like a base tone, and then go up and down from there. Yeah, what I was gonna say here is like, again, this is really beautifully unified through here. I think here when we get like little folds in the flesh, like that is something that's getting a little bit out of control. So similar to what we were saying in some other folks' drawings, you want to really let like this overall plane here, like, play its part and like dominate. Like, don't worry so much about like sinking in all these like small little things, but worry about having this like grouped together. And the flesh most of the time doesn't really have such deep crevices because like the stretching of the flesh over things kind of like smooths those things out. You get some little interruptions, but nothing quite that drastic. Also for these, the pads of the toes, you want to like, look at them as a group to try to, maybe get this like a little bit more rhythmical. And once you have that in, then you want to look at like, maybe one's more squarish than another one, one's more pointy, just kind of, this is like a little too round the same way overall. So there are probably some differences in that Bugaro that we could put in. But yeah, like just kind of flattening this out, this not having it so abrupt. I think more confidently coming back here and just, asserting like what the color is there. Maybe not that, but maybe like right here. Here, not getting too lost in the roundness of this, but, just kind of like remembering that like, almost like a little plane, little set of planes sticking out right there. Okay, so now that we've kind of brought it back a little bit, oh, and here you can wrap this around a little bit more. Like that can wrap around up a little bit more. Again, your brushstrokes are not there to be brushstrokes. They're there to like follow the form basically, right? Just like letters in something that you write are not there to just like, just to appear on their own, but they're contributing to some larger idea. They're building to something. So anytime you have like a brushstroke or whatever, just like think of like what it's doing to the form. Then you can come in here and like, just not even this aggressively, but like, you almost like mix up the same tone, maybe a little darker, and just very like gingerly, almost like sheepishly be like, okay, I'm going to try to go a little bit darker. Like, can I get away with this? And maybe you don't have to go darker here. Maybe just like this little piece right here, as it gets squashed, like catches a little bit of the light, as it like rounds up or something. So you might not have to go darker here. You might just have to go like lighter in the area next to it. And then little things like folds going across. Again, in general, to keep things manageable, try to go like the longer way for a form and then come back and do like the little zigzaggy things across the way. So you could do that, and then again, just little by little, like without trying to, that's too much already. Like you have a very small margin pretty much for like
it's so tough with the Bugaros because you're like, okay, I just need to bump this up a little bit, and then it's like way out of, way overblown, and you're like, damn it, like what I found that's really helpful in that is just really nailing your large simple groups on your initial first stab at the drawing, like really nailing that, because the further you go in to turn the form and add more and more and more and more values, the farther away you get from the groups, and you're never going to get that first stab back. And that's what makes it so hard to study, like you're not him and it's okay.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, for everybody, like, looking at this, it's like he wasn't him for most of his life either, So it's like you look at like all those Bugaros that you and I have looked at, like it's like for a lot of his career, like he was making like just kind of like way patchier, like just really not the stuff that like you think of. Like, people think of him and they think of like these really like beautifully unified, like almost like imperceptible changes in the flesh, and stuff like that. Again, look at how little he's doing. He's like, there's not really any nail there. There aren't even that many value changes. This is like mostly foundation, little highlighter, little contouring, but not like not like spelling everything out, having to like make everything like super chunky. This is an early painting of his, and like look at how like just kind of like like contrasty and separate like all this stuff is for the hair. All that integration that he learned how to do later, like he couldn't really do at the time. The flesh is like really just kind of like yellow and red. There isn't the kind of subtlety that he would have in later years. So it's like, it's a process. Like I like that hair though, little mane.
Yeah.
But yeah, it took him a while to to arrive at where he got.
I do want to squeak.
All right, so,
I want to squeak one more in. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
I sent it to you. It didn't hyperlink, so you just got to click at the little Jake Don't Draw Atelier all the way at the bottom. It says 10 or 123.
Oh,
yeah,
got it.
10.
All right, and it's what, this one right here?
Yeah. Just because he put a bunch of work into these. So.
Oh yeah! Wow.
This is our Greek brother.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Jake and I were just talking about that. There's like, I forget how I ended up on this corner of the internet, but I found like a bunch of Greek schools that were teaching like really good form drawing, which was really cool to see. Like, you don't really hear that much about like Greece and like art education. So it's like, I just kind of assumed all of Europe was just teaching people how to make like popsicle stick sculptures. But
well, I think Dagos complained about in like the actual state university, it's like the big art universities, it's pretty much that it's the level. Yeah,
a lot of places are like that, unfortunately. But this is great. I like the I mean, I know we weren't talking about the aesthetics, but like the look of these is really cool too. It's like I like the stumping in here. I like the this is what we were talking about before, like being able to put down a tone and then just erase out like the tendons and stuff. It's just such an efficient way to work. It's just like it makes life so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing here is you don't want to get like just kind of caught up on like the kind of like the technique-y part of it. Like you'll want to slow down and just sort of like think through some of like the form relationships a little bit more. So for instance, like this is starting to get a little confusing here, and this looks too much like a separate round bump. Like when we read this form here, it feels like we have like this and then like just like a round ball, which is not quite what's happening, right? Like really it's more like you have, you know, basically this like cylinder thing coming in, you know, and what happens is you have like, you know, not just a ball for the bone, but you have like a ramp that starts to come out of it, right? You know, so actually here, I'll just draw this on the side. So imagine that you have just like a little cylinder like this, and then that cylinder has like another little form that's like wedged into it that's growing out of it. Like a, I don't know, like a blade that's coming out of it. Like it's not just like the little ball, but it's like, you know, it's interrupting the cylinder and this thing is like growing out.
What was really helpful
like
for me
this,
with locating the ankle bone is, do you know how Weston does it, where he draws the line and then he does the, you know, like the 90-degree angle off to find the back of the heel and then separates out the thirds?
Oh, no.
Oh.
No, I don't know.
Oh man, I'm not as good as I don't know if I can demonstrate it well.
Oh, okay, yeah. I do want to see that though.
let me try. So
yeah, let's see it. Let's do it.
Let's see if I retained what I learned from the Will Weston lecture.
Will's always coming up with like simple solutions for stuff like that. Like,
yeah, it might have been
like
something that came about after you studied with him.
Mm-hmm.
But what I like is Will Weston always starts from kind of these really basic, proportions first and like simple forms. So what I like is he shows the lower leg is just like a 2x4. It comes down, plugs in like this, and then that plugs, down to the base of the foot like this, and the foot separates into 3 sections. So the first section would be here to here. Think, right? Or does it go to the front of the, I think it should be that. And then, so 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. And then the heel bone comes back at 90 degrees. And then, if this is your 2x4, that was not so 4, that was a 2x2. Here's our 2x4. This ankle that comes off when you connect into the heel, it bumps out like this, And so if you have like a foot in a really complicated perspective where you have, this, calf coming down like this, you can see which direction that's coming down in, and then you can pull, your 90-degree angle off of that, and that's going to pull you out to the back of your heel, and then the rest of this can come out and flex however you need it to.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, hopefully I explained that well enough.
Yeah, that's it's always really interesting because that's kind of like what we were talking about before, like kind of getting in like those rigid forms and then like putting the little tendons like around them and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think ultimately like it's funny, right? Because it's like those are like the bare facts of the foot, where it's like it's this and it's that.
Yeah.
But the thing is that like as you start to do all this fancy stuff, it's like you can lose sight of that, and that it's like you just you lose like the feeling of like the foot like like planting down, or feeling like it's like actually like rigid-ish in structural, which I don't know, it's just like it's just funny because like a lot of stuff does boil down to like essentially kind of a stick figure, maybe like, well, I call it the thick figure because it's like a stick figure with thickness.
Yeah.
But
Better way to put it.
but yeah, like you know, what you want to do here is like, you know, again, squint down and don't focus so much on these small changes, but really try to see like, how is this stuff like kind of traveling over like this? You know, like how is this kind of coming down this like ramp, right? Like again, trying to reconstruct these like basic forms, like, you know, how is this going like around like this? You know, what's the side of it? How does it bump into this little bit right there? But you know, you don't, because I know this drawing, like the original one, the application is really like vigorous, and it kind of feels like it's like, you know, just almost like random, but you have to kind of take a step back, you know, to make sense of it. So I would say like bringing this in here, you know, getting like more of like the roundness of this part of the leg, like the kind of cylindrical quality. There's probably like a bit more squarishness here at the bottom. Like as you start to, you know, shave this, it's easy for things to just get kind of round. So try to preserve like, you know, every little, you know, bit of like what makes this different, like what makes this like maybe more squared up, or maybe like, you know, etc. You know, what makes it just not look like, you know, like a little like ball that's going into here. Maybe like integrating that in a little bit more. You know, likewise on this side, like you know, making sure that this like, you know, comes in sort of like again, not entirely symmetrically to this, but you know, only off by like a little bit. So it's a little higher, a little lower. This is all good here. I would round this out a little more. Like these are, you know, a little too boxy, and then just careful where you put the toenails. That's a little too low right there. You know, I would try to like, yes, you know, here it's like top plane, side plane. But, you know, as you develop that more, you can get more of like, you know, the cylindrical quality of this, like, you know, because for the big toe really does feel very like cylindrical overall. You just get like a little bit more of that in for us. Again, just kind of tying this together a little more. You know, same thing like over here, you know, like, yes, this stuff will separate out, but be careful that these halftones don't just get like bump, 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 bump. You know, if they're too separate from like the main mass, they're going to look like chocolate chips on a cookie, you know? So you want to like, okay, bring these tones and the lights like closer together, right? You can have changes, but they don't have to be like so big. And then right here, just careful with like this pit, you know, here in between the foot, because that makes it feel like a really deep crevice when it's probably just like, you know, like a little bit coming in. And then yes, there will be this change, but again, it probably won't be quite that extreme. So it's just like a matter of like kind of moderation with that. And here it's like, careful that this starts to get lost here and starts to get like just generally round. So again, remember, like, you know, just the foot is like this plank or something. Yeah, like just a piece of wood. Like, okay, remember that you have to like get the bottom of it, you know, maybe get that back plane. You want to separate this out, you know, and here, this is, I think, too contoury. Like this is starting to get like just kind of like balloon out. So just draw like just a simple honest leg, you know, and then like, you know, draw the stuff that balloons out from it like afterwards. But just don't try to get like too fancy in here. And this is again like a little, you have a little ridge going around like that, and then you have like, you know, this little piece going into it like that. So it's like basically it looks like this. Yeah, that part, and then okay, then this little thing, and then, you know, the bottom right there. So we get like, you know, little half cup, then little this thing, and then the bottom right there. Okay, it just makes it like, again, articulates the structure more, makes it so that it's not just kind of like round for the sake of being round. Because you're always going to have a balance of things that get like straighter, things that get rounder, things that get pointier, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, really, really nice. Just again, keep an eye on those overall things, like big construction, don't break up the values too much. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
All right. And then there was one.
Yeah, you know, I'm really just focusing on being pretty casual with these studies, and just, exploring form. I normally do, a try hard drawing for these challenges. I didn't 100% find the time or the need. There's still a lot for me to learn too. That's really exciting. I didn't realize how difficult the foot is. There's so many forms that are intersecting and moving around, and it's a lot of fun, actually. I think there's a lot of things to study and learn about. Yeah,
a lot of the stuff is like weird little crossroads, and you kind of have to like, because obviously we're like, oh yeah, like simplify it, whatever. But like, there are times when you do have to break it down into like 2 parts just to make sense of like, like what the hell you're looking at. Because it, especially like parts of the body that move around a lot, like feet, like fingers, like it's hard to get a grip sometimes on like what is like, what's happening. Because you have like forms like crisscrossing and things like that. And like, that's another thing too, is like the more you learn, the more you see, like obviously that stuff is useful, but it's like there are little snags every now and then when you're like, you see so much that you're like, oh, well, like, fuck, what do I start on?
Yeah.
It can be kind of like a little paralyzing. All right, so let's start with this one here. Yeah, this looks really good. I like this a lot. Like just the leading through with all this, and then like the kind of snap of the toes. Like I think that's always like that's always really satisfying because it gives you that really fleshy feeling where it's like this is coming down, and then it's like languid curve, and then like bump 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 bump. It feels like it's a terrible drawing of this, but like, like cat's paws.
Oh yeah.
Where they're going like this, and then it's or like an eagle's claws or something like that. I mean, we basically have that too, again, especially if we're like gripping something. But I always love seeing that like little like dip from the tendon and then the reversal right there. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really good to like, again, after a while, like we were saying before, it's like you want to like keep up the volume of studying, but it doesn't have to be like really grueling all the time. Again, it's like going to the gym, I guess, where it's like you don't every day doesn't have to be perfect. You just kind of have to like keep going and doing like a moderate amount of work, and it's kind of the same here. I think one thing that I would take a look at is just like in areas like this. Just kind of having like something more unifying, or like, let's say I like this simplification. I like this like little teardrop, and then just like boom, boom, like that. I would maybe like, again, just clarify like how it goes in here, and then I feel a little bit more of like the pull with this. Like this will have like little echoes sometimes, which is sort of nice to include.
I had drawn one of those like Mogilevsev diagrams before this, and is trying to like locate those planes here. But like obviously the cast is far more characteristic, and it's kind of fun to like morph that into it. Yeah,
a lot of those diagrams I think are like it's pretty cool, because I do think that like a lot of them end up being based to some degree on like half real people, half like Greek statues and things like that. And those Greek statues are just full of like really beautiful, elegant simplifications that people came up with like for over the course of like decades. So yeah, I think like for anyone who's trying to make up their own simplifications, or just like or even just trying to like apply this stuff, it's like go look at like Greek sculptures. Like it's like, and Roman ones too. Like the fitting into the forms is so clear, and then it's easier to move on from there to like more like realistic natural forms where things are like obscured a little bit more. Here I would say like maybe like making the tendon ramp a little bit more prominent, just kind of like aiming it more at the toes, so that it really sort of feels like it's gonna connect over there. And maybe here in the back of the heel, this is always like kind of a hard part, because it's like you do have bumps, but probably the most significant thing is like the stretch of the tendon. So I would probably lead with that, and then like bump, bump, like that.
Yeah.
I guess it's the same thing as like over here, right? Where it's like this and this. Yeah, I probably lead with that, and then maybe like work in like some of these like, you know, smaller forms, like the little bumps there if needed. And maybe this here and this here might look a little too parallel, so maybe even like stretching this out a little bit more. Like just feeling that this is the one thing that's missing sometimes with like the more planar diagrams, is like that feeling of like the stretchiness and flexibility of the forms. So it's like, you know, you have to find ways to like sneak that back in, even if it's just like a big stretch or something like that. You know, I think that tends to help. And actually, maybe even like hitting some of these with like the marker or some other like similar thing.
Because the original source of this is a white on black drawing, so it's the mapping is a little bit confusing to look at this.
Oh yeah, is this from a Russian one? The foreshortening is really good.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah, it's a interesting.
Yeah, like this is a good example of what we were talking about before. Like just that, like, you know, even though there's a bunch of detail on this, like the read of it is like, regardless of how much stuff is there, like this is like the feeling that's communicated. It's like. This is a foot like that, you know, it is coming out like that, you know, it's coming at you. Yeah, I think that's really great. Like, I think here, basically the only thing you would need is like some kind of tone to like kind of like clarify this.
Yeah.
And maybe like in here, just like a little bit more like integration of these parts, so it doesn't feel too separate in here. So here, let's go ahead and we'll put this in and go across here.
I sent you the reference if you want to see.
Oh yeah, good. Here, let me take a look. Oh yeah, it's a whiteboard drawing. That's crazy.
Yeah, some chalk. Yeah, it's pretty wild. I have no idea where it comes from or what era it's from. I mean, it must be, if it's, you know, some Soviet diagram or something, probably.
Yeah, I mean that's nuts. Okay, so let's go ahead and this is gonna be a challenge. Like really putting me to work here. Okay, so
yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I don't understand in my drawing. You know, coming from this, like there are like individual tarsal bones, you know, showing in this drawing.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so let's go ahead and give this a shot. So, okay, there is. That's a little too dark. So, okay, if we squint down, you know, there is that like a little horseshoe back here. And I see you have that marked in here. Okay, that's good. So, okay, we have that. And then it's just like a very fleshy foot. So it's like, it's flat through here, right? Like flat-ish, but it's like, yeah, whoever's foot this is, they got some meat, you know, on those little pads. Okay, so this is, you know, pretty boxy. This goes around like this. And okay, this is starting to face up, but this faces down right here. This is the way that I think of this part of the foot is like these kind of like competing like cylinders, right? So like I try to think of it as like, you know, we've got, you know, one cylinder that wants to do this. Oops. Yeah, one cylinder that wants to do that. We got the one for the big toe that wants to do this. We've got, you know, the one for, you know, the leg, you know, slash like ankles, you know, doing that. And then we've got, you know, this bad boy over here, just, you know, pushing out this way here, like that. The thing about, and I guess we see like this stuff underneath here too. This is the bottom right here. Yeah, the thing that's like annoying about this is that like you have all this gap to fill. You know what I mean? So it's like you have this pushing out this way, you have this pushing out this way, and then just like partly, I forget which one it is, but there's a muscle that comes in here that basically just like joins these together, right? So that's the form we're seeing here largely. So that's filling this in. Obviously underneath here we have like an actual like pad and all that, and we have like, padding underneath here as well. But let's go ahead and see what we can do here. So, okay, this is, and try to squint down, and like what I'm trying to get, we have like the flat plank here, and then we're gonna branch off from it. We're gonna pull from this to try to get like our major like foot area here. Because I think the main thing in this drawing is like you just want like because you're working with like a kind of a point medium, it's a little bit hard to get like a really clear sense of like the really big big plane relationships, like as you start adding more detail. Like the value really helps to like organize it and keep it like clear. So maybe from here we'll like okay, so that is like one branch. That's one thing that's pulling off. Then we have this one. So it's like a rhythmical thing. We got like one, we got one pulling off, two pulling off, right? So let's try to grab that here. And the challenge is doing that without like ruining what we already have. So okay, we pull it here.
And this is one of those,
this entire,
what you've given as a prescription for a few other people today, and what you gave me as a prescription a few weeks ago is like, when you first set up that big silhouette of the drawing, the big movement of the drawing, just like having a way that you could like quickly just check each little shape or like each space in relation to each other. This is where that was like super, super helpful. So that you can make sure that that gap in the middle isn't like too wide without like diving too deep.
Yeah. Jake and I talked about this, like just when you're drawing, like, you set up the big thing, but when you're doing the smaller stuff, you just kind of like, okay, how much room do I need for this? How much room do I need for that? How much room do I need for that? Just kind of like assembling the little things like together. Yeah, I think like the hatch marks and stuff that you have here, like that's all really effective. It just, we need a way to like show the big stuff that it's sitting on a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then here, like this just needs to like, we just need like a way to like be able to, show that basically just the full implications of how much this is wrapping around, because you have a lot of those like, those like secondary forms really, really well worked out. And like the big stuff is good too, right? But it's like, as we start like adding more tone or more of those like subforms, it's like there almost has to be a value hierarchy in order for that stuff to like hold its place. Because even if the big stuff is there, it just gets drowned out in like all of these like other smaller things. And I really try to like have it like as much as I can, like, just simple like two values. And then when I really need to, then I'll be like, okay, let's round this. But I'm always like a little like afraid that it's gonna like round out too much. So here, I think we can feel the pull. Like this feels a little too like bump like that. I feel like we can feel the pull of this a little bit more.
That's the tendon connecting to the back of the heel bone, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Achilles tendon.
Yeah, because there's a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of stuff that's like fascia and stuff too. Actually, I think the Achilles tendon is one back here. So I don't even know what this one is right here. Like
it's just like the width of it, probably, right?
It might be, yeah. I mean, sometimes there's just stuff in the body that's like all this stuff is like covered in connective tissue. It's like bandaged up. Yeah. So sometimes like it's hard to pick out like individual like muscles and things. But yeah, here, okay, we can go over here and like reinforce this with hatching, like, just kind of have this be its own thing, have this be its own thing. This is coming in like this, and then it casts a fucking shadow over this. It's crazy.
It's ridiculous.
Like, I want to know what the hell was this person looking at something, or did they just make this up? Because that is like insane if they. But anyway, this is, going across like this, and then okay. But again, trying to just preserve that like big feeling that it's like, just another thing like branching out from that, and then. Yeah, it's like a balancing act, like making sure that it's like, here, like we get like this turning in, but not too much, right? So we get like turn, and then it has to fit into that next form. So what we just did is like just go in, and then cut it across. But even that, it's like I don't even know if we need that much of that. And then again, squint down, maybe like make this a little bit darker so it rounds out a little bit more. And then this form does the same thing. It like starts to turn like this.
I was really confused at what this form coming off of the heel is that connects. Like finding the ankle bone here is kind of a little bit weird. Yeah.
This is let's see.
I think it's kind of because the foot is pushed upwards and the lower leg is crashing inwards. It's kind of tucking the bone in a little bit, so it's not protruding out. And I think it's that bump above the heel, but not the one directly on the lower leg, like that right there. Yeah.
Like right here. Yeah. Okay. So let's think about that. I know this right here is one of the tendons. Like that's the tendon ramp that's going back in. Technically, okay, here's the ankle bone. What you would have here are the flexors of the big toe, like wrapping in like underneath this, and you probably have one of the abductors going across. But like, I wonder if some of this is literally just like the gap where there's like no bone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like. Yeah, I guess that's what, because like, I mean, even in the little explanation diagram up top, it's like, there's like there's like the tarsals. So you got this stuff.
Oh, okay, that's a tarsal. It's not the ankle bone. Okay. So the ankle is sitting up higher. This. Okay.
Yeah, the ankle's up here. So this is like the tarsal bone. This is like, looking at here, this is like the metatarsal, and these are the phalanges right there. So yeah, it's probably just right there. This is the ankle bone right here. This is the tibia, and then right in here is the heel coming out. But yeah, this one's
we're pushing so deep into the weeds.
Yeah, it's like you would literally need to know this like almost never. But and again, there's like sometimes like stuff like fat that you can have in there. But really, I mean, the main thing to keep in mind here is like, just how these like big planes, fit in, and like, again, these like big overall rhythms. Like I would say that like, preserving this, getting like just the kind of echoey quality of like, okay, this going in like this, and then this. So it's like boom, 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 right? Like if nothing else, even if we can't figure out exactly what each thing is, at the end of the day, it's like flesh that's coming down from a central point and is like fanning out like that. And here, this tendon, as we bring it up, it's almost like you have crisscrossing directions, right? You have like this one's, this is reaching up, so we have to like follow through on it a little bit more so that it feels like it's like reaching like upwards into the, into the leg. And then we can, just kind of like let it go, like right about here. And then here's actually the other part of the tendon ramp. So there's like, the one side here, and then here's the other little bit of it right there. But that stops right here, and the tendon keeps going right there. Yeah, this is a really hard one. But yeah,
you know me, I always choose the most absurdly difficult reference.
Yeah, this is like I'm sweating over here, but yeah, I would say like that's probably what I would try to focus on is like just how this stuff like around like this, and then like how this fits into all of that, how this ends here and how this like stretches over this way, and who knows, maybe this guy was making stuff up at some point.
Yeah, that's what Doggo said in the chat. It's probably a mix of some reference and then also just like cramming anatomy knowledge and whatever stylistic.
I mean, who's gonna argue with him?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so in here, let's pull out this one over here.
It's our 18th century.
Yeah, just like hitting all the you're reliving all your past vampire eras through here.
Yeah, now we get into these pillowy forms.
Yeah, I think here maybe like yeah, just like a little bit like boxier on some of this, like or just being careful that like it doesn't round out too much on this side. So like one thing that I noticed when we were looking at that like drawing and some of the other things is that it was like kind of like this little, you know, that little heel part has like a bit of this where it's like, you know, almost like a little cylinder or like a little stopper thing like this. And then as this leg comes out, like you see some of like the cylinder of this leg like poking out on the side of this, right? So it's like you get this and then this just goes like, it's almost like becomes like an outline. You know, because these forms aren't like connecting, like this one just ends and you just happen to see like some of the back of this other one over here. And then this like the, you know, where it connects into the like Achilles tendon just kind of like, it just kind of like trails off almost like it's like, you know, something like that. So maybe like getting that a little bit more aggressive and, you know, like we talked about that little like step down. This is really nice how it fits into here. Yeah, you know, I think a little bit more of the stretching this way. Like I think we're just missing like a little bit of that. It's interesting because yeah, like as you start to get into like the kind of bumpier forms, like you start to like miss out on some of like the stretch of this stuff. And it's always just like a really delicate balance, you know? Maybe this I think could like slim down a little bit right there. Yeah, and like maybe like, you know, again, this however padding, whatever stuff it has, this wants to like retreat back into this, right? It's like you know, from the leg, there's like the split of the heel and the split of like the, you know, the metatarsals for the foot. So this wants to like, you know, return to nature, return to, you know, back from whence it came. So this wants to like, you know, sink into this, you know, in here, and then this wants to like, you know, push out like that. So maybe like, you know, but yeah, just getting like the stretchiness of some of these things here, I think would be good. Like, you know, almost imagining some of those lines more like rubber bands, where it's like you feel the bump, but it's like you keep trying to bring it back to like, you know, having that like, you know, stretchy, like kind of like pushing up, pulling up against things kind of quality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we've done some good things here. I think there's we've given them weapons too powerful for their own good.
Yeah. I think yeah, here, this is the recap. This is the takeaway from today. Accept the feet, not defeat.
Oh,
I think that just really
beautiful,
right? Like
beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, man, you guys put in a lot.
This is a light showing. The last one was crazy. We had like 70 something Fugaro portraits.
Oh my god. But maybe yeah, we'll have to combine them and do like a, you know, Fugaro feet or something.
Oh, we tried. We had the references in the thread, you know.
Yeah, they just didn't take the bait this time.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, this is great. Not every day that you get to talk about the feet at length like this.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I've kind of dragged you deep into the weeds with this, with my last critique too. So it's a good one to end on. We've spent like 3 hours like explaining like how you should just care about the big ideas and simplifications, and then I pull you down to my critique, and we're like, well, what bone is, you know, what muscular attachment is this?
It's good to visit the weeds every now and then. I think it's all you know, it's like balance, you know, keeps us humble. That's a But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I do sometimes like run into stuff like that where I'm like, I know overall what this is. I don't know what the hell I'm looking at, like particularly here. And I think sometimes the best you can do is just like a little detective work. You're just like, well, there's only so many things that it can be. And, you know, if all else fails, it's like, you know, maybe you consult like an anatomy app or something, or you just put a sock on it and then you don't have to worry about all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Yeah, it's you know,
carry real life sock for your models.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very easy, especially for us self-taught artists, to really kind of get sucked deep down into these rabbit holes. And you know, it's not the most important thing. You know, it just depends on what your goals are and what you like to do.
Yeah, I think also just kind of like I guess a final note is like, it is useful to like be in community. Like you and I were talking about this at some point where it's like, if you're just alone working on something, you can just drive yourself up the wall and like just be like, think that you need to do everything, or like just never see an end to a problem. But if you have like other people, whether online or in person, that like have similar goals, they can just be like, all right, you got to move on, man. Like that's too much. Like that's like, you know, and it's something that's hard to see on your own, but like you kind of need other people around you for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
That's what you guys have.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, check out. You know, we plugged it at the beginning of the stream. This is Oblivion music. Plugged it at the beginning of the stream, but the epic painting in the background behind Ramon. Instagram, Mr. Ramon Hurtado. This incredible, you know, 6x4, 5x4 painting is, you know, that Ramon just finished. You know, he's made a full course on it. You know, walking through these steps on how you can actually use information, you know, from the 19th century and from these from this world to you know, to make your own ideas come to life. You know, it's not just about historical painting. So check that out. I just made a reel about it too on my Instagram too, if you want to learn more about this type of stuff. You know, check out Ramon Hurtado too. All that stuff is linked. Yeah, you know, any closing notes?
You know, never be afraid to make a full-size human mannequin for your work. It's worth it. You know, it's better than sitting alone, just kind of like making stuff up and, you know, just wondering about the anatomy and all that. You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.